Ethan Carter grabbed Samantha Miller by the wrist and twisted until she gasped, dragging her half across her own desk, while the whole floor pretended not to see. "Smile at me," he hissed, his fingers crushing her skin. "Smile like you love it, or Alexander Blackwell is dead by Friday, and it'll be your name on the trigger." Then he let go, laughed for the crowd, and walked away. And behind the dark glass of his office, Alexander watched the stranger put his hands on her, watched her forced smile bloom through the tears, and something inside the most dangerous man in New York broke loose and turned to ice. If you love stories about ordinary women who bring dangerous men to their knees, subscribe right now and follow this to the very end. And comment the city you're watching from tonight so I can see how far this story travels. Now let us begin. If you love powerful stories about ordinary women who bring dangerous men to their knees, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because you will not believe how it finishes. And do me one small favor. Comment the name of the city you are watching from tonight so I can see how far this story has traveled around the world. Now let us begin. Samantha Miller had learned a long time ago that the safest place in any room was the corner nobody looked at. She was 27 years old, and she had spent almost every one of those years learning how to be small in a world that punished women like her for taking up space. Not small in her work. In her work, she was enormous. She was the woman who caught the shipping error that would have cost the company $4 million. She was the one who remembered the client's daughter's name, who knew which Port Authority officer took bribes and which one did not, who could pull a contract from 6 years ago out of her memory faster than the legal department could find it in the files. But small in the way she moved through the halls of Blackwell Global Logistics. Small in the way she kept her eyes down. Small in the loose gray blazers she wore to hide a body the world had decided was a problem. She had heard the words her whole life. She had heard them from her mother, who loved her and worried about her in the same breath. She had heard them from the boys in high school who laughed. She had heard them from the recruiters who smiled politely and then hired the thin girl with half her qualifications. So by the time Samantha reached the 29th floor of the most powerful shipping company in New York City, she had built a wall around herself so high that she almost believed nobody could see over it. She was wrong about one thing. One man had been reading her like a book for 3 years. "You're here early again, Miss Miller," said Grace Chen, the woman who ran the front reception desk and was the closest thing Samantha had to a friend in the building. "It isn't even 6:30. "The Rotterdam manifest was wrong," Samantha said, already pulling documents from her bag. "Somebody in operations entered the container weights in pounds instead of kilograms. If it goes out like that, the ship gets flagged in customs and we lose the whole window." Grace stared at her. "How do you even see these things?" "I look," Samantha said simply. "That's all. Nobody else looks, so it just sits there waiting for someone to look." She said it without pride and without complaint. It was just true. She had learned to see the things that other people missed because she herself was one of those things. The overlooked notice, the overlooked. By 7 o'clock, the floor began to fill. By 8, it was full of the people Samantha had trained herself not to envy. The tall women in tailored dresses, the men in suits that cost more than her rent. They walked past her desk without seeing it, and she preferred it that way because being invisible was better than being judged, and Samantha had made her peace with the trade. Then the elevator opened, and the temperature of the entire floor seemed to drop. Alexander Blackwell walked in the way weather walks in. People straightened, conversations died. He was 34 years old, though the ice in his eyes made him seem older, and he moved through his own company like a man walking through a building he did not entirely trust. He never smiled. He never raised his voice. He did not have to. Everyone in that building had heard the stories, the ones that were never printed and never proven. That before Blackwell Global Logistics had become a legitimate empire of container ships and freight contracts, it had been something else. That the men who tried to move against Alexander Blackwell tended to leave the city or the country or the earth. Nobody knew how much of it was true. Nobody wanted to be the one to find out. He passed a dozen desks without a glance. He stopped at Samantha's. "The Rotterdam manifest," he said. Samantha looked up startled. "Sir, you caught it," he said. "It was not a question. Operations sent me a panicked message 20 minutes ago about a customs flag we avoided. They took the credit, but you caught it." For a moment, Samantha did not know what to say. In 3 years, he had spoken maybe 200 sentences to her, and every one of them had been an instruction. I just looked at the numbers, sir. Anyone would have. Something flickered across his face. It was almost but not quite a smile. No, he said it, they wouldn't. And then he was gone into the glass office at the end of the floor, and Samantha sat there with her heart doing something strange in her chest that she immediately told herself to stop doing, because that was the other rule she lived by. Women like her did not get to want men like him. That was not bitterness. It was arithmetic. She had done the math 1,000 times, and it always came out the same. She was wrong about that too, but she would not learn how wrong for a long time yet. That afternoon, the new consultant arrived. His name was Ethan Carter, and he came recommended by the board's financial committee, brought in to audit the company's international transfer systems ahead of a major expansion. He was handsome in the easy, practiced way of a man who had always been handsome and knew exactly what it was worth. He had a smile that arrived before he did. And unlike every other important man who had ever walked past Samantha's desk, Ethan Carter stopped at it. "You must be Samantha," he said, reading her nameplate, and then more importantly, looking at her face when he said it. "I've heard your name 3 times today already, and I've only been here an hour. Apparently, you're the one who actually knows how this place works." Samantha felt heat climb up her neck. "I'm just the executive secretary." "Just," Ethan repeated, shaking his head like she had said something absurd. "There's no such thing as just in my experience. The people who say they're just something are always the ones holding the whole building up." He sat on the edge of her desk, casual, like they were already friends. "I'm going to need your help this week. I'll be honest, I read the org chart, and half of these executives couldn't find the coffee machine without a map. But everyone points to you, so consider yourself warned. You're stuck with me." And he laughed, and it was warm, and it was easy. And Samantha, who had built a wall so high she believed nobody could climb it, felt something she had not felt in years. She felt seen. Over the next 3 days, Ethan Carter did the thing that no one at Blackwell Global Logistics had ever done. He treated her like she mattered. He asked her opinion, and then he actually listened to the answer. He remembered that she took her coffee black. He laughed at her dry, quiet jokes, the ones she usually kept to herself, because nobody had ever laughed before. He asked her about her life, and when she deflected, he did not push, but he came back the next day and asked again gently, like her life was worth being curious about. "You do that thing," he said on the 3rd day, "where you make yourself smaller when someone important walks by. You fold up like a chair." Samantha froze. She had never told anyone that. She was not even sure she had ever admitted it to herself. "I don't know what you mean." "You do," Ethan said softly. "And I just want to say, from someone standing on the outside looking in, I don't understand why. You're the smartest person on this floor. You should be walking around like you own the place." He held her gaze a moment too long. "You've got nothing to hide, Samantha. Nothing at all." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Samantha Miller forgot to fold up. She smiled. It was not the small, apologetic smile she gave clients. It was not the polite smile she gave coworkers. It was the real one, the one she thought she had lost, the one that came all the way up from somewhere she kept locked. She smiled like a woman who had just remembered she was allowed to. And across the floor behind the dark glass of his private office, Alexander Blackwell watched. He had been watching Ethan Carter since the moment the man walked in, but not for the reason anyone would have guessed. He had been watching because something about the consultant was wrong, and Alexander Blackwell had survived to 34 years old by paying very close attention to the things that were wrong. But now he was watching something else. He was watching a smile he had never once been given in 3 years of standing close enough to give it a name land on the face of a stranger. His hand tightened on the edge of his desk. His assistant, a lean, watchful man named Marcus, who had been with Alexander since before the company existed, stepped into the office. "Sir, the Carter file you asked me to pull." Alexander did not turn around. "Read it to me." Marcus opened the folder. Ethan Carter, financial consultant, credentials check out on the surface. Wharton a stint at Goldman, 3 years independent. But, Marcus paused, the 3 years independent don't hold up. His client list is a ghost. 2 of the firms he claims to have advised don't exist anymore, and one of them never existed at all. And sir, he hesitated. The recommendation to the board came through Councilman Vasquez. Now Alexander turned. His face did not change, but the air in the room did. "Vasquez," he said. "Yes, sir." Vasquez works for the Castellanos. Yes, sir. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. The Castellano organization had been trying to break him for 6 years. They had tried the ports. They had tried the unions. They had tried the courts. They had tried a man with a rifle on a parking garage 2 winters ago, and that man was no longer a problem, and neither were the two who had sent him. Alexander had survived all of it because he trusted no one, protected everything, and struck first. And now the Castellanos had sent a smiling man to sit on the edge of a desk and make a woman smile. He's not here for the money, Alexander said quietly. Sir, everyone thinks the money is the target. It isn't. The money is the bait. He looked back through the glass at Samantha, who had gone back to her work, but was still glowing in a way that made something in his chest twist. She knows this company better than the board does, better than you do, better than I do on the operations side. Every contract, every schedule, every weakness. If you wanted to burn Blackwell Global to the ground, you would not point a gun at me. His jaw tightened. You would befriend her. Marcus went very still. You think he knows what she is to the company? I think Alexander said that he found the one door in this building I forgot to lock. And the reason I forgot he did not say aloud is that I told myself she was safe because no one ever looks at her. I made her invisible in my own mind, and a man came in and saw her in 3 days, and I have wasted 3 years. He crossed the floor and stopped at her desk, and Samantha looked up, and the last of the smile was still on her face, and Alexander felt it like a blade. My office, he said. Now. Samantha's stomach dropped. She followed him across the floor, feeling every eye in the building land on her, feeling herself fold up smaller and smaller with each step, because in this company, being summoned to that office was never good news. She stepped inside. He closed the door. The blinds were already down. For a moment, he did not speak. He stood with his back to her, looking out over a city he had bled to control, and when he finally turned around, the man everyone in the building was afraid of was standing where the CEO had been. Don't smile at another man again, he said. Samantha stared at him. She was certain she had misheard. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell. I don't understand. I think you understand perfectly. I was just being polite. He's a consultant. He's been asking me questions about the transfer systems. I know exactly what he's been asking you. His voice was low and even, and it frightened her more than shouting would to him. I know exactly what he wants from you. And there it was, the old familiar knife sliding in exactly where she expected it. Samantha felt her face go hot, but this time it was not from being seen. It was from being seen the way she was always eventually seen. She lifted her chin, and she surprised both of them. What he wants from me, she repeated slowly. You mean because a man was kind to me, there must be something he's after? Because a woman who looks like me couldn't possibly be worth talking to unless he had an angle. She heard her own voice shaking and hated it. Is that what you mean, Mr. Blackwell? Something crossed his face that she had never seen there. He took a step toward her. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because it sounded a great deal like it. I meant, he said, and stopped. She watched him fight with something. She watched the mask slip just for half a second, and behind it was something she could not name. I meant that Ethan Carter is not who he says he is. I meant that he is dangerous, and that every question he has asked you is a knife he is sharpening, and that if you tell him one more thing about how this company works, people will die. His voice dropped. I meant that I have been trying to protect you, and I have done it so badly that a stranger got to you first. The room went very quiet. Samantha did not know what to do with any of it. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, and her mind was tripping over 3 different impossible things at once. That the man in front of her, the coldest man she had ever met, had just admitted to being afraid. That the first person in years to make her feel like a human being might be a lie. And that Alexander Blackwell had used the words trying to protect you and had meant her. You're wrong about him, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. I hope I am, Alexander said. I have never hoped to be wrong about anything more in my life, but I am not. He looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, the ice was gone from his eyes entirely, and what was underneath was so raw that she had to look away. Do not trust him, Samantha. Whatever else you believe about me, believe that. She left his office shaking. She sat back down at her desk, and Ethan Carter appeared not 30 seconds later, sliding into the chair beside her with a coffee he had brought her black, the way she liked it. You okay? He asked, all concerned. You look pale. Did Blackwell chew you out for something? God, that man. He treats everyone like a suspect. He put the coffee down in front of her and leaned in warm and worried and perfect. You want to talk about it, I've got a good ear. And Samantha looked at the coffee and looked at his kind face, and for the first time she saw it. Just for a moment, the thing behind the eyes, the watching, the way his concern turned on the instant she looked upset like a light switch. The way he had steered the conversation every single time toward the transfer systems, toward the schedules, toward the passwords, toward the weaknesses, and had made her feel so grateful to be asked that she had never once noticed she was being emptied out like a drawer. I'm fine, she said carefully. Just a scheduling thing, nothing interesting. And she watched his face and she saw the flicker of disappointment before he covered it, and she knew. She knew. That night, Samantha did not go home. She told Grace she had work to finish, and she waited until the floor emptied, until even the cleaning crew had gone, and then she did the thing she was better at than anyone in the building. She looked. She pulled the access logs. Every key card swipe, every login, every file open for the past 2 weeks cross-referenced against Ethan Carter's official audit scope. And what she found made her hands go cold. Ethan Carter had accessed 41 files that had nothing to do with a financial audit. Shipping schedules for the next quarter. Security rotations at the ports. The personal calendars of the 6 most senior people in the company. And buried in the middle of it at 11:14 the previous night, when the building should have been empty, he had opened the master file of internal transfer protocols. The exact document that would tell a person how the company moved money. The exact document that would tell a person how to make it disappear. Samantha sat in the dark office with the glow of the screen on her face, and she understood all at once the full shape of what was happening. Alexander had been right. Ethan was not after the money, or he was, but the money was not the point. The point was that he would take the money in a way that pointed straight back at her. He had spent a week making her feel special. He had made sure the whole floor saw them together, saw her smiling, saw him bringing her coffee. He was building a story. And in that story, the lonely secretary, who finally got some attention from a handsome man, was the woman who got seduced into betraying the company. They were not going to steal from Alexander Blackwell. They were going to make him believe that Samantha had. And the worst part, the part that made her press her hand to her mouth in the dark, was that it would work. Because everyone in that building already believed she was nobody. It would be so easy for them to believe she was a traitor too. You could not fall from a height they had never let you reach, but you could be dragged straight to the bottom, and no one would even be surprised. She had to tell Alexander. She reached for her phone, and that was the moment the elevator opened, and Ethan Carter walked back onto the darkened floor and saw her sitting there alone with the access logs open on her screen. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan smiled, and this time he did not bother to make it warm. You know, he said, walking toward her slowly, I really did hope you were as forgettable as everyone said. It would have been so much cleaner. He stopped at the edge of her desk, and the easy charm was gone, and what stood in its place was something patient and cold. You looked. Nobody told me you look. Samantha's hand closed around her phone under the desk. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, Ethan said almost kindly. Don't do that. Don't get smaller. It's the one interesting thing about you that you don't have to. He tilted his head. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, $4 million is going to leave 3 of Blackwell's shell accounts. It's going to move through channels that only a person with your access could have opened. And when they trace it, they're going to find your fingerprints on every door. He leaned in. And you're going to sit very quietly and let it happen and take the fall, because the alternative is so much worse. Do you understand me, Samantha? There is a whole organization behind me. You are one fat, lonely woman with no one who would even miss you. He said it to break her. He said it the way everyone had always said it, the words she had spent her whole life folding up to avoid. And for 1 second, the old Samantha almost obeyed. For 1 second, she almost got smaller. And then she thought of Alexander Blackwell, standing in his office with the ice gone from his eyes, saying, I have been trying to protect you. And she did not get smaller. She stood up. You've made one mistake, Samantha said, and her voice did not shake at all. The same mistake everybody makes. You looked at me and you decided I was nobody, so you stopped paying attention. She turned her screen toward him, and 41 file names glowed in the dark between them. You've been in this building for 4 days. I've been in it for 3 years. You think you emptied me out. You have no idea how much I was letting you take and how much I was watching you take it. The color drained from Ethan Carter's face. I know every account you touched, Samantha said. I know the timestamps. I know the mistake you're planning to use, the little gap in the internal process, because I'm the one who flagged that gap 8 months ago and got told it wasn't a priority. You didn't find a weakness in this company. You found the one thing I already knew about. She was breathing hard now, but she did not stop. You wanted a story about a stupid, grateful woman who got played. Here's the story you're actually in. You got played by the woman everyone underestimated, including you. For 1 second, Ethan Carter looked at her with something that was almost respect and entirely hatred. Then his hand went into his jacket, and the elevator opened a second time. Alexander Blackwell stepped onto the floor, and behind him came Marcus, and behind Marcus came 3 men Samantha had never seen, and every one of them was already looking at Ethan Carter's hand. I wouldn't, Alexander said. The room hung on a wire. Ethan's hand came out of his jacket, slowly empty, and he raised both palms, and the cold, patient thing behind his eyes calculated a new set of odds. Blackwell, he said, smooth again, reaching for the charm. This isn't what it... You came back to the building at night, Alexander said, ignoring him entirely, to find out how much she knew. He was not looking at Ethan. He was looking at Samantha, and his eyes moved over her, once fast checking that she was whole. You came back because a smart woman working alone in the dark is a loose end. And you found out. His voice went very quiet. You found out exactly how much she knew. That was the last thing you were ever going to learn in my building. Marcus and the 3 men moved, and Ethan Carter was suddenly not the most dangerous person in the room, and he knew it, and Samantha watched the whole elegant structure of his contempt collapse into an ordinary man who was very afraid. You want to talk? Ethan said quickly, backing up. The Castellanos, they'll make you an offer. This doesn't have to... Take him downstairs, Alexander said. Quietly, he has friends who will want to know he failed, and I want to be the one who tells them. They took him. The elevator closed, and then it was just the 2 of them again, Samantha Miller and Alexander Blackwell, standing in the dark on the 29th floor, with 41 file names glowing between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You came back, Samantha finally said. Her legs had started shaking now that they were allowed to. How did you know? I never left, Alexander said. I've been in the parking garage across the street since 7 o'clock watching this building. He looked almost embarrassed, which on his face was so strange she nearly did not recognize it. I told myself it was because I expected him to make his move tonight. That was true, but it was not the only reason. He took a step toward her. You stayed late. You've been staying late for 3 years, and every single time I've made sure the building was watched until you got home safe. I never told you. I never told anyone. I told myself it was about the company. He stopped. It was never about the company. Samantha stared at him. The wall she had built so high, the one she was so certain no one could climb, was standing there with a hole punched clean through the middle of it, and she did not know when it had happened. You said don't smile at another man, she said slowly. You made it sound like an order, like you owned me. I know. It was cruel. I know that too. He looked at her, and the ice was gone, and it did not come back. I have spent my whole life learning how to control everything around me, because the one time I didn't, I lost the only people I ever trusted. So when I felt something I couldn't control, I did the only thing I know how to do. I tried to give it an order. He shook his head, and for a moment he looked almost young. It was the wrong thing to say. What I meant was something I did not have the courage to say, so I said something ugly instead, and I have been sick about it all day. What did you mean? Samantha said. It was barely a whisper. Alexander Blackwell, the most powerful and most feared man in New York City, stood in the dark in front of a curvy secretary in a loose gray blazer, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he told the truth. I meant that I have watched you save this company 100 times and let other people take the credit, he said. I meant that I have memorized the way you fix things before anyone knows they're broken, and the way you stay late to help people who never thank you, and the way you smile when you think no one is watching. I meant that I have been standing close enough to you for 3 years to give you a reason to smile like that, and I never did, and then a liar walked in and got it in 4 days, and it did something to me that I did not have a name for until today. He stopped. The name is Fear, Samantha, not the smiling. The fear that I waited too long, that I made you invisible in my own mind because it was easier than admitting you were the first thing I had looked at in years. The silence after that went on and on. Samantha's eyes were burning. She thought of every year she had spent doing the math, the arithmetic that always came out the same. Women like her do not get to want men like him. She thought of the recruiters and the boys in high school, and her mother's worried love, and the whole long lesson of her life, which was that she was too much and not enough at the same time. And she had believed it. She had built a life around believing it. And here was the coldest man she had ever met telling her the math was wrong. I don't need someone to own my life, she said, and her voice broke on the last word, but she said it anyway. I've had my whole life told me what I'm worth by people who never asked me. I don't need one more, even if he's the most powerful man in the city. Especially if he's the most powerful man in the city. I know. I need someone who believes in me, not someone who protects me from a distance in a parking garage and never says a word. That isn't believing in someone. That's just another way of keeping them small. Alexander flinched because it landed because it was true. Then let me start over, he said. Not as your boss, not as the man giving orders through a wall of glass. He held out his hand, and the gesture was so unguarded, so unlike everything he had shown the world, that Samantha's breath caught. My name is Alexander. I have been afraid of the wrong things my entire life, and the smartest person I have ever met just saved everything I built standing alone in the dark when she had every reason in the world to let it burn. I don't want to protect you, Samantha. I want to stand next to you. There's a difference. It took me until tonight to learn it. Samantha looked at his hand. She thought about how easy it would be to fold up one more time, to be small, to be safe, to give the polite smile and go home and keep the wall exactly as high as it had always been. And then she thought about the woman she had been an hour ago standing up in the dark telling Ethan Carter that he had underestimated her. That woman had been there the whole time, folded up in a gray blazer, waiting. Samantha Miller did not fold up. She took his hand. And somewhere downstairs, the Castellano organization was about to learn that they had sent their best liar into a building where the one person nobody ever looked at had been watching everything all along, and that the empire they had spent 6 years trying to break had a foundation they had never even known was there. Neither of them knew yet how much was still coming. They did not know about the man inside Alexander's own circle who had told the Castellanos exactly which door to try. They did not know that the $4 million was only the first move, or that the real trap had not sprung yet, or that before it was over, Samantha would have to walk into the center of everything Alexander had built and decide whether the man holding her hand was worth the risk of losing the one thing she had guarded her whole life, which was herself. But for now, in the dark on the 29th floor, a woman who had spent 27 years learning how to disappear finally let herself be seen. And the most dangerous man in New York held her hand like it was the only thing in the city he was afraid to break. Downstairs, the elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped out alone, and the look on his face told Alexander that something had already gone wrong. Sir, Marcus said, Carter's gone. Alexander went still. Gone how? There were 3 men. 2 of them are on the floor of the loading dock, Marcus said quietly. The 3rd one opened the door for him. He let that land. We have a problem inside the house, sir. We've had one for a while, and Carter just walked straight out the front of it. Samantha felt Alexander's hand tighten around hers, and she understood in that instant that whatever she had just walked into it was not over. It had not even truly begun. She squeezed his hand back anyway. Then we find out who opened the door, she said. I've got 3 years of access logs, and every one of them remembers who was standing where even when the people don't. She looked up at him, and the last of the old fear had burned away, and what was left was something harder and cleaner and entirely her own. You wanted to stand next to me, Alexander. Here's your chance. Nobody in this building knows how to look the way I do, and somebody's about to find out exactly how badly they underestimated the fat secretary. Alexander Blackwell looked at her for a long moment, and then for the first time in 3 years in the dark with an empire cracking around him and a traitor loose in his own house, the coldest man in New York City smiled. Show me, he said, and she did. Show me, Alexander had said, and she did. But looking took time, and time was the one thing they did not have because a traitor who had already opened one door would not wait politely for Samantha to catch him. She knew that the moment she sat down at her terminal and started pulling the badge logs, and she said it out loud before Alexander could tell her. "He's already moving," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Whoever opened that loading dock door for Ethan, he knows I keep these logs. He knows I can read them. So right now, tonight, he's either deleting his own tracks or he's getting ready to run. We don't have days. We have hours." Alexander pulled a chair beside her, closer than a boss would ever sit, and she felt it and did not stop typing. "Then narrow it," he said. "Who had access to the loading dock override at that hour?" "Everybody thinks the override is a mystery," Samantha said. "It isn't. It's a 4-digit code that changes every 90 days, and only 9 people in this building have it." She pulled the list. 9 names glowed on the screen. Marcus, you, 2 dock supervisors, the head of security, Dennis Rourke, and 4 people on the executive floor. Marcus leaned in over her shoulder and read the names, and Samantha felt him go still. "Rourke was off site tonight," Marcus said. "Family thing. He clocked out at 5. "He clocked out at 5, Samantha corrected on his badge. "But watch this." She split the screen, and there it was laid out in glowing numbers that could not lie. His badge left the building at 5:02, but his login credentials accessed the security camera server at 10:41 from inside the building. She turned and looked at Alexander. "You can't be in 2 places at once, Mr. Blackwell. Either Dennis Rourke walked out and then walked back in without his badge, which is against every rule he wrote himself, or somebody else has his password." The room went quiet. "Rourke has been with me 11 years, Alexander said slowly. His voice had gone flat and careful the way it did when he was holding something down. "He built our whole security system. He knows every camera, every blind spot, every door. Which is exactly why it's either him," Samantha said, "or it's the person he'd trust with his password. And Mr. Blackwell, a man like that doesn't give his password to anybody. So it's him, or somebody took it off him." She swallowed. "And if somebody took it off him, then he might already be a problem too, because a man who built your security system knowing there's a leak in my it, and who then goes quiet on a family emergency the same night the leak springs is either the traitor or the next body." Alexander stood up so fast the chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Marcus, get eyes on Rourke's house, now. Do not knock. Just tell me if he's alive." Marcus was already gone, and Samantha sat in the sudden quiet, and the size of what she had walked into landed on her all at once. An hour ago, she had been a secretary who caught a shipping error. Now she was tracing a traitor inside a criminal empire, sitting beside the most feared man in New York, and she had just calmly explained how one of his oldest men might be dead. She felt her hands start to shake again. She pressed them flat against the desk to stop them. Alexander saw it. Of course he saw it. He saw everything. "You can stop," he said quietly. "You've done more tonight than anyone had a right to ask. Go home. I'll put 4 men on your building. You never have to touch any of this again." And there it was, the escape hatch. The chance to fold up one more time, to be small and safe and out of it. A week ago, she would have taken it before he finished the sentence. "No," Samantha said. "Samantha, you said you wanted to stand next to me instead of protecting me from a parking garage." She looked up at him, and her hands were still shaking, but her voice was not. "You don't get to say that, and then the second it gets dangerous, try to put me back behind the glass. That's not standing next to someone. That's just the same wall with nicer words on it." She turned back to the screen. "I'm not leaving, not because I'm brave. I'm terrified. I'm staying because I'm the only person in this building who can read these logs faster than he can delete them, and you know it, and I know it, and pretending otherwise wastes time we don't have." For a long moment, Alexander just looked at her. 11 years, he finally said. "I've never once let anyone tell me no in this building and mean it." "Then it's about time somebody did," Samantha said, and kept typing. Something in his face changed some tension she had not even known was there, and he sat back down. Closer this time. 12 minutes later, Marcus called. Samantha watched Alexander's face as he listened, and she knew before he said a word. She knew from the way the muscle in his jaw locked. "He's alive," Alexander said, lowering the phone. "Rourke's alive. He's tied to a chair in his own basement with his mouth taped, and he's been there since about 5:30. Marcus is bringing him in." "So somebody took his password," Samantha breathed. and used his access to walk your security system blind while Ethan did whatever he needed to do, which means the person we're looking for isn't Rourke. It's whoever knew Rourke would be off tonight for a family thing and grabbed him right after he clocked out. She was already pulling a new file. Who knew about the family emergency because that wasn't public, that was personal. His wife would know. His people would know. Alexander frowned. And whoever he told at work. He'd tell one person at work, Samantha said, the person who'd have to cover his shift. Her fingers stopped. On the screen, a single name sat next to the security shift reassignment, logged at 4:52, 8 minutes before Rourke walked out the door and got grabbed on his own driveway. The name was Victor Hale. Alexander went absolutely still. Victor Hale, Samantha read carefully. Deputy head of security. He approved his own shift transfer to cover Rourke tonight, which put him in charge of the cameras, which is how Rourke's credentials got used from inside the building while Rourke was tied to a chair in his basement. She looked up. Do you know him? I know him, Alexander said, and his voice had gone somewhere Samantha had never heard it go. I've known Victor Hale for 15 years. He carried me out of a warehouse in Newark when I was 22 years old and bleeding out from 2 bullets. I gave him this job. I gave him my trust. He stood slowly this time. I gave him a Christmas bonus last month, and he shook my hand and looked me in the eye. Samantha said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had traced a lot of numbers in 3 years, but she had never once had to watch a man find out that the person who saved his life was the person trying to end it. There's more, she said gently, because he needed to hear all of it, and there was no soft way to give it to him. Look at the transfer timestamps. She pulled up the financial logs beside the badge logs, laying them side by side. Everyone thinks the $4 million is going to move tomorrow morning. It isn't. Ethan set it up to move the second the building went dark tonight and stayed dark. That's why the traitor needed control of the cameras. Not to help Ethan escape. Escaping was the backup plan. Her voice dropped. The real plan was to move the money tonight through my access with the cameras showing nothing, so that when you woke up tomorrow, $4 million would be gone, and there'd be footage of nobody, and the only fingerprints in the system would be mine. But it hasn't moved, Alexander said. It hasn't moved, Samantha agreed, because I'm sitting in the system. Right now, the transfer's queued and waiting, and it can't execute while I'm logged in at the master terminal because the protocol locks out simultaneous high-level access. That's the flaw I flagged 8 months ago and got told wasn't a priority. It's the same flaw Ethan was going to exploit. She almost laughed, and it came out shaky. The company's about to be saved by a security hole that everyone ignored because the only person watching it tonight is the woman they said didn't matter. And that was the moment every light on the floor went out. Not just the office, the whole floor. The screens died. The hum of the building stopped. Somewhere below them, a generator failed to catch, and the darkness that fell was total. In the black, Samantha heard Alexander move, felt his hand find her shoulder steady and hard. Don't move, he said low, right beside her ear. He killed the power. That means he knows we found him, and he knows you're the lock on the money, and there's only one way to move that money now. Get me out of the system, Samantha finished, and the cold understanding of it went straight through her. The transfer needs the master terminal clear. As long as I'm logged in, it can't run. So he doesn't need to hack me anymore. He just needs me gone from this desk. Yes. Then I'm not moving from this desk. Samantha, he's coming up here in the dark to make you move, and he is not a man who asks twice. Then he's going to have a very hard time, Samantha said, and reached out in the black until her fingers found the keyboard by touch. Because I don't need to see the screen to work it. I've had this login memorized for 3 years. I could execute a lockout blind. Her fingers started moving on muscle memory alone. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm changing the master password right now from memory so that even if he drags me out of this chair, the transfer can't run without a credential that now only exists inside my head. She heard Alexander exhale. You're going to make yourself the only key. I'm already the only key, Samantha said. I've been the only key this whole time. They just needed me to not know it. She hit the final keystroke. Done. The money is frozen behind a password that lives in one place now, and that place is me. He can turn off every light in New York. He cannot type what he cannot know. And in the dark close to her ear, Alexander Blackwell said something she would remember for the rest of her life. I have spent 15 years, he said quietly, surrounded by dangerous men, and not one of them ever made me feel safer than you just did sitting in the dark with your eyes closed. Before she could answer, the stairwell door at the far end of the floor opened. Footsteps, unhurried. A man who was not afraid of the dark because he had spent 11 years learning where every camera and every blind spot in this building was. Alexander the Victor Hale's voice came out of the black, calm and warm, the voice of an old friend. I know you're up here. Come on, let's not do this in the dark like animals. Let the girl go home. This was never about her. Samantha felt Alexander's hand tighten on her shoulder, felt him start to rise, and she grabbed his wrist and held it because she had just understood something that he, in his fury and his heartbreak, had missed. Don't answer him. She breathed so quiet it was barely sound. He can't see either. He killed his own lights. He's talking to find out where you are. Every word you say tells him where to walk. Her mind was racing now, running the floor plan she knew by heart, every desk, every corner, 3 years of walking these aisles in the same worn shoes. He doesn't know this floor the way I do. He knows the cameras, but the cameras are off. Right now in the dark, I know this room better than he does. Let me move us. Alexander, Victor called again, closer now. You're going to make me do something I don't want to do. I owe you my life, you know that. But there are people I owe more than I owe you. People who will hurt my daughter if this money doesn't move tonight. A pause. That's the truth, brother. They've got Emma. That's why. I never wanted this, but I'm not letting my little girl die for your empire. So one of you is getting up from that terminal right now, or I start shooting toward the sound of your breathing. And that changed everything. Because Samantha heard it, the crack under the calm, the desperation of a father, and she understood that the man walking toward them in the dark was not a monster. He was something worse and more human. He was a good man doing a terrible thing for a reason that, if it were her father, if it were her own child, she was not sure she would be strong enough to refuse. The whole shape of the night turned over in her mind. Victor, Samantha said, and she felt Alexander flinch beside her because she had just given away their position, and she squeezed his wrist to say, trust me. My name is Samantha. I'm the woman at the terminal, and I need you to listen to me because I don't think you've been told the whole truth, and it's going to get your daughter killed. The footsteps stopped. You don't know anything about my daughter, Victor said, and now his voice was raw. I know they told you the money is the point, Samantha said into the dark. It isn't. I've been reading the whole plan for 2 hours. The $4 million is a distraction, Victor. Ethan Carter set the transfer to trace back to me so that Alexander would spend the next month tearing his own company apart, looking for a traitor, hunting a woman who never did anything, while the Castellanos took the ports out from under him. They don't need this money. They're worth 100 times this. This whole thing is a smokescreen. She took a breath. And here is the part they didn't tell you. Once that money moves and the frame is set, that you are the loose end that knows they did it. A man who would grab a father by threatening his little girl does not hand that little girl back once she's done her job. You know that. Somewhere in you, you already know that. The second this works, Emma isn't a hostage anymore. She's a witness, and so are you. The silence that came back was the longest of Samantha's life. You're lying, Victor said, but his voice had cracked all the way through. You're the secretary. You're trying to save your own skin. I'm the secretary, Samantha agreed. I'm the woman everybody in this building walks past. And that's exactly why I know I'm not lying, Victor, because nobody ever bothered to lie to me. Nobody thinks I'm worth the effort. So I've spent 3 years just watching and reading and seeing the things people do when they think no one's looking. And I am telling you, as the one person here with no reason to protect anybody, that the man who has your daughter is going to kill her the moment she stops being useful. And you moving this money is the moment she stops being useful. Samantha. Alexander's voice so low only she could hear it. What are you doing? Saving his daughter, she whispered back. Because he's not the enemy. The enemy sent him. And if we kill him in the dark like he's the enemy, a little girl dies tonight for nothing. She raised her voice again. Victor, I froze the money. It can't move now, not by you, not by anyone, because I changed the password and it only exists in my head. So the plan already failed, which means in about 10 minutes when Ethan calls the man holding Emma to tell him it didn't work, that little girl becomes a liability with a witness attached. Unless, she let it hang. unless we get to her first. Another silence. And then in the dark, Samantha heard something she had not expected. She heard a grown man start to cry. They said it would be clean, Victor whispered. They said no one gets hurt. They said move the money and Emma comes home and it's over. A ragged breath. I carried you out of that warehouse, Alexander. I held your hand while you screamed. And tonight I taped Dennis Rourke to a chair, and I told myself it was for her, and the whole time I felt myself becoming something I can't come back from. A pause. Is he alive, Rourke? He's alive, the examiner said, and his voice had changed too. The fury was still there, but under it was something older, the voice of a man talking to a brother. Marcus has him. He's alive, Victor. Thank God. A shudder in the dark. Thank God for that, at least. Where is Emma? Samantha said. Right now. Do you know where they're holding her? A warehouse, Victor said, and his voice steadied around the one thing that mattered to him. Red Hook, on the water. There's 4 men in a boat, and the boat leaves at midnight, whether the money moves or not. That was always the plan. Money moves, Emma goes on the boat, boom, and gets dropped somewhere safe. Money doesn't move. His voice broke. They didn't tell me what happens if the money doesn't move. But I know. I've always known. I just couldn't let myself say it. Samantha looked at the glowing green numbers in her memory, the timestamps, the schedules, 3 years of knowing exactly how this company moved things through Red Hook, and a plan assembled itself in her head so fast it frightened her. What time is it? She said. 10:56. Alexander answered. Then we have 64 minutes before that boat leaves, and I know that pier. She was already standing, moving in the dark by memory, her hand finding Alexander's arm. Blackwell Global runs 3 container berths in Red Hook. I do the scheduling. I know which berth is empty tonight. I know the harbor patrol rotation because I file the paperwork, and I know that at 11:40 every night, a container ship called the Aurora Star pulls into the next berth, over and lights that whole waterfront up like daylight for 20 minutes while it docks. She turned toward where Victor's voice had been. 20 minutes where 4 men in a boat suddenly have nowhere to hide. That's our window, not the money. The Aurora Star. How do you know the ship's schedule down to the minute? Victor said, and there was wonder in it now. The wonder of a man realizing the person he'd been sent to frame was the smartest one in the room. Because I'm the secretary, Samantha said. I know everything. Everybody just forgot to ask. And Alexander Blackwell, standing in the dark in the ruins of the worst betrayal of his life, laughed once low and disbelieving. Victor, he said, put the gun away. You're not shooting anybody tonight. A beat. You're going to help us get your daughter off that pier, and then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the difference between the man who saved my life and the man who taped Dennis Rourke to a chair. Both of those men are you. We're going to figure out which one walks out of Red Hook. His voice hardened. But that starts with you trusting the woman who just did more thinking in 5 minutes than my whole organization did in a week. Can you do that? A long pause in the dark. Yeah, Victor said finally, and Samantha heard the gun's safety click back on. Yeah, I can do that. God help me. The secretary. The emergency lights flickered on, then dim and red, and for the first time they could see each other. Victor Hale was a big man, gone gray at the temples, and his face was wet and wrecked, and for the first time in hours human. He looked at Samantha standing beside Alexander, not behind him, and he shook his head slowly. They told me you were a nobody, he said. The Castellanos. They said Blackwell's got one weak spot, a fat little secretary with all the access and none of the sense to use it. That's the whole plan. Frame the nobody. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. You're the most dangerous person in this building, and they built their entire plan on you being harmless. That, Samantha said quietly, is the only mistake they made, but it's the one that's going to cost them everything. Alexander was already moving snapping orders into his phone, but Samantha caught his sleeve. There's a problem, she said low just to him. A big one. If we all go to Red Hook and pull Emma off that boat, Ethan finds out inside the hour that the frame failed and the girl's gone. And the Castellanos don't take a loss quietly. They'll burn something to make a point. They've got people inside this building we haven't found yet because Victor was one man and this operation had more than one hand in it. She held his eyes. Getting Emma back tonight is the right thing to do, but it starts a war. You need to know that before we drive to that pier. The second we save that little girl, the Castellanos know you know, and there's no more quiet after that. It's open. Alexander looked at her for a long moment, and Samantha watched him weigh at the empire, the risk, the exposure, all the cold arithmetic of a man who had survived by never making an emotional decision. A war, he repeated. An open one, she said. For a girl who isn't yours, who you've never met, whose father was helping frame you an hour ago. You're telling me the smart move, Alexander said slowly, the move that protects the empire is to let the boat leave. Samantha's throat tightened. I'm telling you what the numbers say. I'm not telling you to do it. And Alexander Blackwell looked at the woman who had spent her whole life being told she did not matter and made the first purely emotional decision of his adult life. Then to hell with the numbers, he said. We get the girl. Let them have their war. I've been waiting 6 years for the Castellanos to give me a reason nobody could argue with. He turned to Victor. You're going to point out every one of their people inside my house tonight, all of them, and in exchange your daughter sleeps in her own bed, and you get to find out which version of yourself you are. Deal. Victor Hale looked at the man whose life he had saved and whose empire he had almost destroyed, and something in his face came apart and then put itself back together. Deal, he said. They were 3 minutes from the elevator when Samantha stopped dead. Wait, she said. Her blood had gone cold. Wait. Something's wrong. She grabbed Victor's arm. You said the boat leaves at midnight, whether the money moves or not. You said that was always the plan. Yeah. Then why did they need the money to move tonight at all? Samantha's mind was racing again 3 steps ahead, and she did not like where it landed. If Emma's on that boat at midnight either way, the hostage was never really about the money. Threatening your daughter got you to grab Rourke and take the cameras. That's what they needed you for. But to frame the money moving through my access, that's a whole separate operation that didn't need you at all. She looked at Alexander and the horror of it dawned on both of them at once. There's a second person. Victor got the cameras, but somebody else was supposed to move the money the instant the building went dark. Somebody with access as high as mine. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. And that person is still in this building, right now, waiting for me to leave this terminal so they can try. The red emergency lights hummed. Who has access as high as yours? Alexander said. Nobody, Samantha whispered. That's the point. Nobody has access as high as mine, except. She turned slowly toward the glass office at the end of the floor, the one that had been dark and empty this whole time, the one belonging to the man who had signed off on her clearance 3 years ago, the one person whose credentials sat one level above her own in the entire system. Except the CFO, except the man who hired me, except Daniel Voss. And from the dark doorway of that office, a voice said, You always were too smart for this place, Samantha. I told them that. I told them you'd be a problem. Daniel Voss stepped into the red light. He was silver-haired and calm, and he was holding a gun, and he was pointing it not at Alexander, not at Victor, but at Samantha, because Daniel Voss had always understood better than anyone in the building exactly who the dangerous one was. Daniel, Alexander said, and his voice was ice all the way down. You, 15 years. Everybody keeps saying that tonight, Voss said tiredly, not lowering the gun. 15 years, 11 years, all these years of loyalty. You want to know the truth? Alexander loyalty is just the story people tell about the time before the better offer came. His eyes stayed on Samantha. Change the password back. Log the transfer through. You've got about 4 seconds before I decide the frame works just as well with you dead as it does with you disgraced. And Samantha Miller, who 12 hours ago would have folded up small enough to disappear, looked down the barrel of that gun and did the last thing anyone in the room expected. She smiled. You want the password? She said. Fine, I'll give it to you. But you should know that I changed it to something specific tonight, Daniel. Something I picked on purpose because part of me knew somebody like you would eventually be standing right where you're standing. Her voice did not shake. The password is the exact date and time you approved the security flaw report I filed 8 months ago. The one I sent you. The one you buried. The one that made all of this possible. She watched his face change. You didn't ignore that report because it wasn't a priority. You ignored it because you were already working with the Castellanos and you needed that flaw to stay open. It's all in my sent folder, Daniel, time-stamped. Every email, I've had the proof for months, and I didn't even know what I was looking at until tonight. The gun wavered. Just slightly. Just enough. Because Daniel Voss was a numbers man, and Samantha had just shown him a number that ended his life as he knew it. And in the half second it took him to understand that the frame was already broken, that there was documentation that killing her would not save him. In that half second, his attention slipped from the woman to the math. And Victor Hale, who had spent 11 years learning where every blind spot in this building was moved through the one right beside him. It was over in 3 seconds. The gun hit the floor, Daniel Voss hit the wall, then the ground with Victor's knee in his back and Victor's voice in his ear saying, "You son of a bitch, you used my daughter. You knew and you let them use my little girl." And Samantha Miller stood in the red light between the man who had saved her and the traitor who had underestimated her, breathing hard, still standing, not behind anyone. And she looked at the clock on the dead wall out of habit, even though it was dark, and Alexander said quietly, 11:11, we have 49 minutes. Then we don't have time to deal with him, Samantha said, stepping over Daniel Voss without a second glance. Marcus can take him with Rourke. Right now, there's a boat in Red Hook and a little girl on it, and everything we just did means nothing if we're not standing on that pier when the Aurora Star lights it up. She was already walking, and Alexander fell in beside her, and Victor hauled Voss up by the collar. And for the first time in her life, Samantha Miller walked toward the elevator at the front of the floor instead of hiding at the back, and every red emergency light in the building lit her the whole way there. "You had the proof for months," Alexander said as the elevator doors opened. "The emails. You could have destroyed him whenever you wanted." "I didn't know I had it," Samantha said. "That's the thing nobody understands about being invisible, Alexander. You collect everything, you see everything. But nobody ever tells you what any of it means because nobody thinks you matter enough to explain. So you just sit there holding all the pieces of the truth and not one person ever asked you to put them together." The doors began to close. "Tonight's the first night in 3 years anybody asked." Alexander looked at her in the falling light. "I'm asking," he said. "For everything after tonight, I'm asking." And as the elevator dropped toward the street, toward Red Hook, toward a father's daughter in an open war, and everything that was coming, Samantha Miller finally let herself believe that the arithmetic of her whole life had been wrong, and that somewhere down at the bottom of all those numbers she had been carrying alone, there had always been an answer, and it had always quietly been her. The elevator hit the lobby. The doors opened onto 4 men in dark coats standing between them in the street, and every one of them was reaching into his jacket, and Samantha understood in one cold heartbeat that the Castellanos had not waited for the war to start. They had already sent it up the block. "Behind me," Alexander said, stepping in front of her on pure instinct, the old reflex, the wall going up. And Samantha Miller put her hand flat on his back and pushed him gently aside and stepped up beside him instead. "No," she said. "Next to you, we agreed." "Next to you, we agreed." And in the half second that Alexander turned his head to look at her, unable to help it, unable to believe her, one of the 4 men in dark coats made his move, and Samantha did the only thing she could think of, which was the thing she had done her whole life. She spoke. "Marcus is behind you," she said loud and clear and certain to the 4 men and not to Alexander at all. "Turn around." It was a lie. Marcus was in Red Hook. But it was the kind of lie that only works if the person saying it is the last person you would expect to be brave. And Samantha Miller looked exactly like a woman who would never dare. And so for one full second, all 4 men flinched and glanced over their shoulders at a threat that was not there. 1 second was all Alexander needed. He moved the way she had once seen weather move fast and total, and it was over before Samantha's heart finished a single beat. 2 men down. The gun in the 3rd man's hand skittered across the lobby floor. Victor Hale hit the 4th like a freight train, and then it was quiet again. And Alexander stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, and turned to her with an expression she had never seen on any human face, let alone his. "You lied to 4 armed men," he said, in a full sentence, without your voice shaking. "I've been lying about being fine for 27 years, Samantha said. 4 men in coats aren't that hard." But her hands were shaking now badly, and Alexander saw it, and he did not tell her to go home this time. He just took one of her shaking hands in his for exactly 2 seconds, pressed it once, and let go. 11:14, Victor said tightly from across the lobby, dragging one of the men toward the wall. "The Aurora Star docks at 11:40. It's a 12-minute drive to Red Hook if the lights are with us. We have to go now." They went. The drive was the longest 14 minutes of Samantha's life, and she spent every one of them working because working was the only thing that kept the terror in her chest from from turning into something that stopped her hands. She had Victor's phone. She had her own laptop open on her knees, tethered to her phone back inside the Blackwell system through a connection only she knew existed, because 3 years ago she had built herself a way to check the shipping schedules from home and never told anyone because nobody had ever asked what she needed to do her job. "Talk to me about the pier," Alexander said from the front seat, not turning around his eyes on the road ahead. "Everything. Now." "Berth 4 is empty tonight. That's where the boat is," Samantha said, her fingers flying. "Berth 3 is where the Aurora Star comes in. When she docks, the whole waterfront lights up, floodlights, deck lights, the works for about 20 minutes while they run the gantry cranes. During those 20 minutes, 4 men standing on berth 4 with a little girl have nowhere on that pier to hide because I designed the lighting layout myself 2 years ago, and there's not one shadow deep enough to hide a child in." She swallowed. "But there's a problem. A big one." "Of course there is," Alexander said. "The boat isn't waiting for midnight to leave." Samantha turned the laptop so Victor could see it in the mirror. "I just pulled the harbor traffic feed. That boat's engine signature went active 4 minutes ago. They're not sitting at the pier until 12. They're prepping to move now." Her voice went cold. "Which means somebody already called them. Which means the Castellanos already know the frame failed and Emma is now a liability, and they're not waiting for a deadline. They're getting her out before we can reach her." Victor made a sound like something tearing. "How long? How long do we have?" Samantha looked at the numbers. She did the math. She had done 1,000 times the math that always came out cold and honest, whether she wanted it to or not. If they push off before the Aurora Star docks, they disappear into open water in the dark, and we lose her. The Aurora Star docks at 11:40. The boat's warming up now. It's a race, and right now the boat is winning. "Then we make the boat wait," Alexander said. "How?" Victor said. "How do we make 4 armed men on a boat wait for us to get there and take them?" And Samantha, staring at the harbor feed, at the berth assignments, at 3 years of knowledge about how this port breathes, saw it. "I can stop the Aurora Star," she said it slowly. "You want to stop the ship." Alexander turned around now. "You just said the ship is the thing that lights up the pier." "No, listen." Her hands were flying again. "I don't stop it. I slow it down and I change where it docks. Right now, the Aurora Star is assigned to berth 3 next to the boat. But I do the berth assignments, Alexander. I can reassign her right now from this laptop to berth 4. She looked up and her eyes were bright and terrible. "Berth 4, where the boat is. A 900-foot container ship does not care about a 30-foot boat sitting in the slip it's been ordered into. If I put the Aurora Star into berth 4, that boat cannot leave because there will be a wall of steel the size of a building sliding in on top of it. They'll be pinned against the pier. They can't run, and when the ship's floodlights come on, they'll be pinned against the pier in broad daylight." The car went silent. "You can do that," Alexander said, "from your lap, in a moving car." "I've had the access for 3 years, Samantha said. "Nobody ever thought to take it away because nobody ever thought I'd use it for anything but paperwork." She was already typing. "Reassigning now. The harbor pilot will get the new berth order in 90 seconds, and he won't question it because it comes from Blackwell Dispatch, and Blackwell dispatches me." She hit enter. "Done. The Aurora Star is now docking at berth 4. That boat has about 11 minutes before there's a container ship where their exit used to be." Victor Hale looked at her in the rearview mirror with tears standing in his eyes. "You just trapped 4 armed men and my daughter between a pier and a 900-foot ship." And the terror hit Samantha all at once because he was right, she had, and Emma was on that boat. "Oh God," she whispered, "Emma's on the boat. If the ship pins the boat and they panic," she could not finish it. "Then we have to be on that pier before the ship arrives," Alexander said, and to the driver, "Faster." 11:26. They came around the last corner and the waterfront opened up in front of them, dark and vast, and there at berth 4 was the boat engines running and 4 men in a small shape between 2 of them that made Victor Hale make a sound Samantha would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. "That's her," he choked. "That's Emma. That's my baby." "Victor!" Alexander's hand shot out and gripped his arm hard as the car slowed. "Look at me. If you run out there screaming her name, they put a gun to her head, and this ends one way. You know that. You've done this work. Be the man who carried me out of Newark, not the father, for 90 more seconds. Can you do that?" Victor was shaking, but he nodded. "Samantha," Alexander said, "when does the ship arrive?" 11:31, she said, watching the harbor feed on her lap and the real pier through the windshield at the same time. 5 minutes. When those floodlights hit, everyone on that pier is exposed and blinded at the same moment. That's the window. 5 minutes. She looked up. But there's a fifth man. I only see four. Victor said 4 men in a boat. But look, the driver's already in the boat, and there's 3 on the pier and Emma. That's 4 visible. Where's the fifth? And that was when the passenger door of a parked car 20 feet away opened, and Ethan Carter stepped out into the dark, straightening his jacket, alive and free, and smiling because the third man in the building tonight had opened a door for him, and Ethan Carter had walked out the front of it and driven straight here to see his plan through to the end. Well, Ethan said, looking at their car as they rolled to a stop. He could not see them through the dark glass, not yet, but he was looking anyway, drawn to it. Somebody's early to the party. Alexander went very still. That's him. That's him, Samantha breathed. He came here. He came to make sure the boat left. He doesn't trust his own men to finish it. Her mind was already turning it over, already 3 steps ahead, which means he doesn't know about the ship. He thinks the boat's leaving in a few minutes and Emma disappears and the frame holds. He has no idea there's a container ship 4 minutes out about to pin his whole operation against the pier. Then we don't tell him, Alexander said softly. We let the ship do it. 11:28, 3 minutes. Ethan was walking toward the boat now, calling to his men, and Samantha could just hear it through the cracked window, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Change of plan, Ethan was telling them. Blackwell's moving faster than we thought. We're not waiting for midnight, and we're not dropping the kids somewhere soft. She's seen faces. Put her on the boat. Once we're in open water, she goes over the side, and this whole thing's just a sad story about a father who couldn't protect his little girl. He checked his watch. Push off in 2 minutes. Victor Hale stopped breathing. 2 minutes, he said, and his voice was not a voice anymore. He's going to throw my daughter in the water. Alexander, he's going to drown my little girl. The ship's 3 minutes out, Samantha said, and the horror of it closed around her throat because the math had finally caught up, and the math was wrong. The math did not work, and the boat pushes off in 2. They leave before the ship pins them. They leave before the lights. I was 1 minute too slow. Oh God, I was 1 minute too slow. For 1 second, the whole world stopped. And then Samantha Miller did the thing that changed everything. The thing that a week ago she would never have believed she was capable of, the thing that came from 27 years of being the person nobody ever watched. She opened the car door and stepped out into the dark, alone in her loose gray blazer, and she walked toward Ethan Carter with her hands open at her sides, and she called out across the pier in a voice that carried clear over the running engines. Ethan, it's me. It's Samantha. I froze the money, and I'm the only one who can unfreeze it, and if that boat pushes off, you'll lose $4 million forever. Every man on the pier turned. Ethan Carter turned, and for 1 precious second, nobody was pushing off, because the numbers man's whole plan had just walked out of the dark and offered him the one thing he had come here to secure. Samantha. Ethan smiled, delighted and dangerous. You brilliant, stupid woman. You came to me. I came to make a deal, Samantha said, walking closer, keeping every eye on her and only on her buying seconds. Buying the one thing that mattered. Buying time for a ship she could see now over Ethan's shoulder, its running lights growing in the dark. You want the money to move. It can only move with my password, and my password lives in my head. And if you drown that little girl and get on a boat, that money stays frozen forever, and the Castellanos gut you for losing $4 million and blowing the whole operation. You know they will. You know exactly what they do to people who cost them money. She stopped 10 feet from him, right in the floodlight zone. She had designed herself right where she needed to be. So here's the deal. The girl walks off that boat right now onto the pier, and I unfreeze the money in front of you. That's it. That's the whole deal. You get everything you came for. You just have to let one child live. Ethan studied her. She could see him doing the arithmetic, weighing it, and she knew he would take it because a man like Ethan Carter would always choose the money. You'd give up the money, he said, for a girl you've never met. I'd give up anything, Samantha said, and it was the truest thing she had ever said, to stop being the kind of person who watches and does nothing. I've been that person my whole life. I'm done being her tonight. 11:30, 1 minute. Get the kid, Ethan called to his men, his eyes never leaving Samantha. Bring her up onto the pier, slow. If the secretary's lying, the girl goes back on the boat and we leave, and Samantha, we take you with us instead. They brought Emma up onto the pier. A small girl, 9 years old, her wrists bound, her face streaked, and brave and terrified. And when Victor Hale saw his daughter step off that boat onto solid ground, he made no sound at all, because Alexander had his arm locked across the man's chest in the dark, holding him, whispering, "Not yet, not yet, wait for the light." "Now unfreeze it," Ethan said. "The girl's on the pier, your turn." "I need my laptop," Samantha said. "It's in the car." "Nice try," Ethan's smile thinned. "You do it from memory or the deal's off. I've heard all about your memory." And Samantha Miller looked past Ethan Carter's shoulder at the enormous dark shape sliding silently toward Berth, 4:30 seconds out. Now its floodlights not yet lit, and she understood that she did not need a laptop, and she never had, because the thing she had really come out here to do was not unfreeze any money. It was stand in exactly this spot and hold every eye on the pier until the light came. "All right," she said, "the password. Are you ready? It's a date and a time, Ethan. It's the exact moment." She raised her voice, buying the last seconds, watching the shit, watching. "It's the exact moment you people decided a woman like me didn't matter enough to worry about." The floodlights of the Aurora Star came on. The entire waterfront turned to daylight in an instant, 900 feet of container ship blazing with light 40 yards away and closing. And every one of Ethan Carter's men threw a hand up against a glare they had not seen coming, blinded, exposed, pinned. And in that one blind second of pure white light, Samantha Miller screamed the only word that mattered. "Now, Victor, now!" Alexander let go. Victor Hale crossed the pier in the light like a man made of grief and muscle, and 11 years of knowing exactly how to move. And he had Emma in his arms, and his body between his daughter and every gun on that pier before the first man's eyes had even adjusted. Alexander was one step behind him and moving the other way toward the men into them, and Samantha dropped flat to the concrete the way she had known she would have to the moment she designed those floodlights. Because the person who plans the ambush is the one person who knows to get out of it. It was chaos and light and noise, and it lasted maybe 20 seconds. And when it was over, the four men were down on their knees, and Victor Hale was on the ground with his back against the bollard and his bound, weeping daughter crushed against his chest, cutting the zip ties off her wrists with shaking hands and saying her name over and over, "Emma, Emma, Emma, baby, I've got you, Daddy's got you." And Ethan Carter was gone. Samantha pushed herself up off the concrete and turned in a circle in the blazing light, and Ethan Carter was not among the men on the ground, and her stomach dropped, and then she saw him, and her blood turned to ice. He had her. In the confusion of the light, he had come around behind her, and now Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the pier with his arm locked around Samantha's throat and a gun pressed to her temple, backing toward the dark water, and his easy charm was entirely gone, and what was left was a cornered animal that had lost $4 million and an entire operation in the space of 30 seconds. "Everybody stop," Ethan said, and his voice cracked on it. "Stop, or I put a hole in the secretary's head, and we find out how much Blackwell really cares about the help." Alexander went absolutely still 40 feet away, and Samantha saw his face in the floodlights, and she saw the thing she had never once seen there in 3 years. She saw fear. Naked, total, undisguised fear, the fear of a man who had built his whole life on controlling everything and was watching the one thing he could not lose held at the edge of the water with a gun to her head. "Ethan," Alexander said, and his voice was not steady, and that terrified Samantha more than the gun. "Ethan, listen to me. You let her go, you can walk. I mean it. The boat's right there. You get in it, and you go, and I never look for you, but you hurt her, and there is no country on this earth far enough. Do you understand me? There is nowhere. You'd trade the empire," Ethan said, tightening his arm until Samantha could not breathe, "for her. The fat little secretary, I don't believe you." "Believe me," Alexander said, and his voice broke completely on the word, and every person on that pier heard the most dangerous man in New York City stop being dangerous and start being just a man who was about to lose everything. "Please, I have never said please to anyone in my life. I'm saying it to you. Please." And Samantha Miller, with a gun against her temple and no air in her lungs, looked at Alexander Blackwell, begging for her life on a pier in Red Hook, and she felt something break open in her chest that had been locked her whole life. And in the middle of her own terror, she understood completely and forever that the arithmetic had always been wrong. Women like her did get to be wanted. She was wanted. She was wanted so much that the coldest man in the city was on the edge of begging a killer, and it had taken a gun to her head for her to finally fully believe it. And believing it made her calm. "Ethan," she said, and her voice came out steady, even with his arm crushing her throat, because a woman who has just learned she matters is not the same woman who walked onto that pier. "You're standing on berth 4. "Shut up. I designed it berth 4, Samantha said. "I know every inch of it. And I know that right behind you, 8 feet back, the pier ends, and there's a 40-foot drop to the water. And the Aurora Star's wake is coming in right now because a 900-foot ship just docked, and that wake is going to hit the pilings in about 3 seconds, and it is going to move everything that isn't bolted down." She felt him shift, felt the first flicker of doubt. "You're not bolted down, Ethan, and neither am I. So when I say drop, I'm going to make us both fall, and one of us knows how to swim in the dark in this harbor because she's studied the current charts for 3 years, and one of us doesn't." "You're bluffing," Ethan hissed. "You wouldn't. I've spent my whole life being too scared to jump," Samantha said. "You picked the one night I stopped being scared." The wake hit the pilings. The whole pier shuddered, and in the half-second that Ethan Carter's balance faltered, Samantha Miller drove her heel down onto his instep with every pound of the body the world had spent 27 years telling her to be ashamed of, and she threw all of that weight backward into him, and they both went over the edge of the pier into the black water 40 feet below. The floodlights blazed down on the empty edge of berth 4, and Alexander Blackwell screamed her name and ran for the water. 11:34. The harbor was black and cold and churning with the ship's wake, and Samantha went down deep, and the cold hit her like a wall. And for one terrible moment, she did not know which way was up. But she had studied these current charts. She had filed the harbor safety reports. She knew the way, she knew everything that the current here ran toward the pilings, and she let it take her. And she found the ladder rungs bolted to the piling exactly where the maintenance schedule said they would be, because she was the one who approved the maintenance schedule. Ethan Carter did not know where the ladder was. Ethan Carter had never once read the maintenance schedule because Ethan Carter thought paperwork was for people who did not matter. She heard him thrashing somewhere in the dark, panicking, dragged by a current he did not understand toward pilings he could not see, and she felt no triumph and no mercy, only the cold clarity of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid. And she climbed, hand over hand, up the ladder she had ordered, inspected 8 months ago, up out of the black water into the blazing light, and Alexander's hands closed around her wrists at the top and pulled her the last 4 feet onto the pier and held her against him so hard she could feel his heart slamming against her cheek. "You're alive," he kept saying. "You're alive. You're alive." Like he could not make it be true just by seeing it, like he had to say it to believe it. "I'm alive," Samantha said, soaked and shaking, and alive. "I told you, I studied the current charts." And Alexander Blackwell pulled back and looked at her, water streaming down both their faces, and he did the thing he had wanted to do for 3 years and had never once let himself do. He took her face in both his hands, and he kissed her there in the floodlights on the edge of the black water, in front of Victor Hale and his rescued daughter, and a pier full of men on their knees. And it was not the kiss of a boss or a mafia king or the most dangerous man in New York. It was the kiss of a man who had almost lost the only thing he had ever been afraid to want. When they broke apart, Samantha was crying and laughing at the same time. "Ethan," she said, "he's still in the water." "Let the harbor have him," Alexander said roughly, his forehead against hers. "Or let my men fish him out for the police. I don't care. I'm not letting go of you to find out." But Marcus was already there, Marcus, who had made it back from securing Rourke. Marcus with 2 men and a boat hook and a floodlight. And 30 seconds later, they dragged Ethan Carter half-drowned and choking out of the black water, the smiling man who had walked into Blackwell Global 4 days ago and decided the fat secretary was harmless. And as they pulled him onto the concrete, he looked up through the water in his eyes and saw Samantha Miller standing over him, soaked, alive, unbroken, next to Alexander Blackwell and not behind him. "How?" he managed to choke out. "How did a secretary—" "You keep asking that," Samantha said, kneeling down so he could hear her over the sound of his own coughing. "How did a secretary? And you're going to spend a long time in a small room asking it. So let me give you the answer now so you have something to think about." She leaned close. "A secretary is the person who reads everything you don't. A secretary is the person who knows where the ladders are and where the flaws are, and where the money moves and when the ship comes in. A secretary is the person you walk past 100 times and never once look at. You built your entire plan on me being nobody, Ethan. That wasn't a mistake in the plan. That was the plan. And it was always going to be the thing that drowned you. She stood up. 11:37, across the pier in the blazing light, Victor Hale sat on the concrete holding his daughter, and Emma had stopped crying, and she was looking around the pier with the enormous solemn eyes of a child who had been through something no child should ever go through. And her gaze found Samantha, the soaking wet woman in the ruined gray blazer who had walked out of the dark and made a deal to save her. "Are you the one who saved me?" Emma asked in a small, clear voice that carried across the sudden quiet. Samantha walked over to her dripping and knelt down on the cold concrete so they were eye to eye. "Your dad saved you," Samantha said. "Your dad has loved you so much this whole night that he almost broke the world open to get you back. Don't you ever forget that. Whatever else you learn about tonight when you're older, you remember that your father loved you more than his own life." Emma looked at her father, and Victor Hale made a sound and pressed his face into his daughter's hair. "But you," Emma said, still looking at Samantha with those enormous eyes. "You came out of the dark by yourself. There were all those men and you just walked right up to them. Weren't you scared?" And Samantha Miller, soaked to the bone 40 feet from the black water she had just climbed out of, looked at this brave, terrified child and told her the truth. The truth she wished someone had told her at 9 years old, the truth she had waited 27 years to finally understand herself. "I was so scared," she said. "I was more scared than I've ever been in my life. But sweetheart, listen to me, because this is the most important thing I know." She took Emma's small, cold hands in her own. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. Being brave means you're terrified and your hands are shaking, and everybody in the whole world has told you you're not strong enough, and you walk out of the dark anyway. The scared part never goes away. You just stop letting it decide who you are." She squeezed the little girl's hands. "You were brave tonight, too. I saw you. You stood there on that boat and you didn't fall apart. That's the bravest thing I ever saw." Emma looked at her for a long moment, and then the little girl let go of Samantha's hands and threw her arms around her neck, wet blazer and all, and held on, and Samantha held her back, and over the child's shoulder she saw Alexander Blackwell watching her with an expression that no longer had anything cold in it at all. 11:41. The police lights were coming now, blue and red sweeping across the water. Real police, the kind Alexander apparently still had reach with, and there would be statements and arrests and a very long night still ahead. Ethan Carter and his men would go into the system. Daniel Voss was already in a room somewhere with Marcus's people. Dennis Rourke was safe. The $4 million was frozen behind a password that lived in one woman's head. The frame had collapsed. The empire still stood. But it was not over, and Samantha knew it was not over because she stood up from hugging a rescued child, and she looked at Alexander Blackwell across the blazing pier, and she said the thing that had been sitting cold in her chest since the car. "This is war now," she said. "We got the girl. We broke the frame. But the Castellanos just lost $4 million, an entire operation, 2 men inside your house, and their best liar all in one night, all because of me. They're going to come for you, Alexander. And now they know exactly who to come for first." She looked down at her own hand, still shaking, still hers. "They know it's me." Alexander crossed the pier to her. He did not tell her she was safe. He did not put up a wall. He did not promise to protect her from a parking garage across the street. He had learned finally that none of that was what she needed. Instead, the most dangerous man in New York City took both her shaking hands in his, in the blue and red and white light, with a rescued child watching and a broken enemy at their feet, and he said the only thing that was true. "Then let them come," Alexander said. "For 6 years I've been fighting the Castellanos with fear and money and men, and I've been losing by inches the whole time, and I never understood why." He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "I was fighting them with the wrong weapon. I was fighting them with everything I had. I should have been fighting them with the one thing they'd never see coming. The one person they'd never think to watch." His grip tightened. "You want to know how a secretary saved everything tonight, Samantha? That's how the whole war ends. The same way. With the one person nobody ever looks at watching everything all the way to the end." Samantha Miller looked at him, and for the first time in 27 years, she did not do the math. She did not run the arithmetic that had always come out the same. She did not fold up. She did not make herself small. She stood on a floodlit pier in Red Hook, soaking wet hands, shaking more alive than she had ever been, and she looked the war coming for her dead in the eye, and she was not afraid of it. "Then let's end it," she said. "Together, next to each other." A pause. "But Alexander, if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. Not with fear, not with guns in lobbies. My way." She almost smiled. "You've been running this empire on everybody being afraid of you. I'm going to show you what happens when you run it on people underestimating me instead." And somewhere across the black waters on the other side of the city, in a room Samantha and Alexander had not yet found, a phone was ringing, and a man named Salvatore Castellano was about to hear that his best liar was in police custody, his $4 million was frozen, and his entire 6-year plan to destroy Alexander Blackwell had been dismantled in a single night by a woman his people had described in their very first report as harmless. He was going to want to know everything about her. He was going to make it his life's work to find out. And he was going to learn the same way every man in this story had learned that the most dangerous person in any room is the one you never bothered to look at. He was going to make it his life's work to find out. And 3 days later, Salvatore Castellano made his first move. And it was so quiet that only one person in the entire Blackwell organization noticed it. That person was Samantha. "Something's wrong," she said, standing in the doorway of Alexander's office at 7 in the morning, and Alexander looked up from his desk and knew from 3 days of learning to read her that whatever it was real. "Tell me." "A shipping container." She crossed to his desk and laid a single sheet of paper on it, one line highlighted. "One 40-foot container came into berth 2 last night on a manifest from a shell company in Newark. The paperwork's perfect. Too perfect. Everything's filled out exactly right, every field, every signature, which is the first thing that's wrong, because real paperwork always has something a little off, a typo, a rushed signature, a wrong box." She tapped the line. "This is the paperwork of somebody who studied our system and made it flawless. And nobody makes a manifest flawless unless they don't want it looked at." Alexander sat back. "You think it's them?" "I know it's them." She pulled a second sheet. "Because I traced the shell company, and it dissolves back through 4 other shells, and the 4th one shares a registered agent with a firm that Councilman Vasquez used to sit on the board of. The same Vasquez who recommended Ethan Carter." Her voice was flat and certain. "It's Castellano. It's his first move. And Alexander, it's not a bomb. It's not men. It's not money. I've been staring at this for 2 hours, and I finally understand what it is." She looked up. "It's a message. That container is empty. I pulled the weight sensors from the crane. It weighs nothing. He shipped you an empty box, perfectly documented, right into the heart of your operation just to prove he can. Just to say I can put anything I want inside your walls and you won't see it coming." 7:18 in the morning. 3 days after Red Hook and Alexander Blackwell felt the war he had promised to fight arrived not with a gun, but with an empty box, and he understood with a cold clarity that Salvatore Castellano was not like the enemies he had beaten before. "He's telling us he's patient," Alexander said slowly. "He's telling us he's smart," Samantha corrected, "and that he knows we're watching now. He knows about me, Alexander. That empty box isn't a message for you. Read the delivery instructions." She slid the paper closer. "It's addressed to the executive secretary's desk. He sent an empty container across the country and routed it on the paperwork to me. He's not threatening you. He's introducing himself to me." The office went very quiet. "He knows your name," Alexander said. "He knows my name," Samantha said. "He knows I'm the one who broke his plan, and he wanted me to be the one who found his message so that I'd know he found me first." She set the paper down and pressed her palms flat on the desk to stop her hands, an old habit that was becoming a new one. "This is a man who thinks the way I think. That's what scares me. Ethan was a liar with charm. Voss was greedy. Victor was desperate. I understood all of them because I could see what they wanted. But this man," she shook her head, "this man wanted me to see exactly this much and no more. He's controlling what I know. Nobody's ever done that to me. I'm always the one who sees everything. And he just showed me that he can decide what I see." Alexander stood and came around the desk, and he did the thing he had learned to do in 3 days, which was not to tell her she was safe. Instead, he stood next to her and looked at the same paper she was looking at. Then we stop playing his game, he said. We stop reacting to his moves. What do you need? I need to get inside his head the way he just got inside mine, Samantha said. And to do that, I need to stop being the secretary who reads his paperwork after it arrives. She turned and looked at him. I need to become the person who knows what he's going to do before he does it, which means I need access I don't have. I need to see everything, Alexander, every account, every contact, every file in this whole organization, including the ones you've never shown anyone, including the ones about what this company used to be before it was legitimate. Her eyes did not waver. I need you to trust me with the parts of your life you've spent 15 years hiding. Because Salvatore Castellano already knows them, and I'm fighting blind while the enemy reads your whole history. And there it was, the real test laid bare on the desk between them. Alexander Blackwell had built his entire existence on the principle that no one ever saw all of him. Marcus knew pieces, Voss had known pieces, and look what Voss had done. The one time in his life he had trusted people completely, he had lost them, and the losing had made him into the man who trusted no one. And now the woman he had almost lost off a pier 3 days ago was asking him to hand her the whole thing. All of it. The blood, the history, the bodies, the truth. You're asking me to show you the worst of what I am, Alexander said quietly. I'm asking you to stop making me fight with one hand tied, Samantha said. But yes, that too. She held his eyes. And I want you to understand what I'm really asking, Alexander, because I think you've never had anyone ask it. I'm not asking you to trust me because I've earned it, though I have. I'm asking you to trust me because trusting people is the thing you don't know how to do. And it's the exact hole in your life that Castellano is going to climb through. He's not going to beat you because he's stronger. He's going to beat you because he's willing to trust his people, and you're not. And a man who trusts no one has no one watching his back. Her voice softened. I watched your back on that pier. I need you to let me watch it everywhere else too. 7:31. Alexander Blackwell looked at Samantha Miller for a long, long moment, and then he walked to the wall behind his desk and he pressed his palm to a panel that Samantha had never known was there. And a section of the wall opened, and behind it was a second office, small and windowless, that no one in the building had ever seen. Everything I am, he said, is in this room. 15 years of it. The parts I built and the parts I buried. He stepped aside. Nobody has ever been in here but me. Not Marcus, not Voss, not anyone. Samantha looked at the open door and she understood what it cost him, and she understood that it was the single most naked act of trust she had ever witnessed from any human being. Then let's go to work, she said, and she walked in, and Alexander Blackwell watched the one person he had ever fully trusted step into the center of his whole hidden life. And for the first time in 15 years, the wall he had built around himself did not feel like protection. It felt like a prison she had just unlocked. They worked for 2 days. Samantha did not sleep more than 4 hours either night, and Alexander did not leave her side, and slowly, out of 15 years of buried history and a mountain of files no one had ever cross-referenced, because no one had ever been trusted to see all of them at once, a picture began to form. And the picture was worse than either of them had imagined. Alexander. It was the second night past 2 in the morning, and Samantha's voice made him look up from across the small room. She had gone pale. I found something, and I don't know how to tell you because it changes everything and it's going to hurt. Tell me. Salvatore Castellano has been inside your organization for 6 years. She turned the screen toward him. Not spies, not one traitor here and there like Voss. I mean, he has had a source at the very top of your company for 6 years feeding him everything, and that's how he's known every move you made before you made it, and that's why you've been losing by inches the whole time and never understood why. She swallowed. I found the pattern by cross-referencing every operation that went wrong against who had access to it, and every single failure for 6 years traces back to information that only a handful of people ever had. Her voice dropped. 3 people, Alexander. Only 3 people have had access to every single thing that leaked, and 2 of them are dead or in custody. Voss, and a man named Reyes who died 2 years ago. She stopped. And the third, Alexander said. Samantha looked at him, and her eyes were wet, and she did not want to say it. The third is Marcus, she whispered. The name landed in the small room like a body hitting the floor. No, Alexander said immediately, automatically, the way a man says no to the sky falling. No, not Marcus. Marcus has been with me since before there was a company. Marcus was in Newark. Marcus was on that pier 3 nights ago, pulling Ethan Carter out of the water. Marcus, I know, Samantha said gently. I know what he's been to you. That's why I checked it 4 different ways before I said a word. I didn't want it to be him either. She turned the screen. But look, the Rotterdam thing that almost sank you 2 years ago, Marcus had the manifest. The union problem, Marcus set the meeting. The man with the rifle on the parking garage, Marcus arranged your schedule that week. Her hands were shaking again, and this time she let them. And 3 nights ago, Alexander. On the pier, Ethan Carter escaped from the building because a third man opened a door for him. You never found out who. It's been eating at you. I found it tonight. She could barely say it. The door log. It was Marcus's credentials that opened it. Marcus let Ethan Carter walk out of the building. And then Marcus drove to Red Hook and pulled him out of the water in front of you so that you would never, ever suspect him. Alexander Blackwell sat very still. Samantha watched 15 years of a man's life break in front of her, and she wished with everything in her that she had been wrong, and she had checked 4 times because she had prayed to be wrong, and she was not wrong. He saved my life, Alexander finally said. His voice was hollow. In Newark, he carried me out. He held my hand. Victor Hale carried you out of Newark, Samantha said softly. Victor told me that himself 3 nights ago on the pier when he thought he was about to die. Victor carried you out and held your hand while you screamed. She met his eyes. Marcus told you it was him, didn't he? Somewhere along the way, Marcus told you the story of Newark and put himself in it. And you were bleeding out and half-conscious, and you never questioned it because why would you question the man who was always there? She reached across the small space and took his hand. He's been building his place in your heart for 15 years, Alexander. Brick by brick. A false memory here. A saved life there. So that when this day came, when someone finally looked closely enough to see him, you would refuse to believe it. And it almost worked. Look at your face right now. Part of you still refuses. Alexander pulled his hand back and stood and walked to the wall and put his palm against it. And Samantha watched a man she was falling in love with fight the hardest fight of his life, which was not against an enemy, but against everything he had needed to believe to survive. If you're wrong about this, he said without turning around, I will lose the only person left from before. If you're wrong, I destroy a man who has bled for me for 15 years over a door log that could have 100 explanations. I know, Samantha said. And if you're right, he continued, then everything I have believed about my own life is a lie that a man built inside my head while smiling at me, and I have to accept that the closest thing I have ever had to a brother has been selling me to the man who wants me dead since before this company existed. He turned around and his face was terrible. How do I know, Samantha? How do I know which one it is? Because I cannot survive being wrong in either direction. And Samantha Miller, who had spent her whole life being underestimated, who had learned to read people because reading people was the only power the invisible are given, looked at the man she loved and gave him the only answer that was real. You test him, she said. You don't accuse him. You don't confront him. You give him a piece of information that only he could have, and you make it a trap, and you wait to see if it walks out the door to Castellano. If it does, you'll know, and it won't be my word against 15 years of memory. It'll be Marcus's own hand caught in the act. She stood. And Alexander. If I'm wrong, the trap catches nothing, and Marcus never even knows he was tested, and you lose nothing. That's the only fair way, for him and for you. She took a breath. But I need you to prepare yourself because I have read 10,000 pages of your life in 2 days, and I am telling you with everything I have learned about seeing the truth that I am not wrong. I would give anything to be wrong. I'm not. 2 days later, they set the trap. It was Samantha's design, and it was clean, and it was cruel in the way that only the truth is cruel. Alexander told Marcus, and only Marcus in confidence, that Samantha had discovered where Salvatore Castellano moved his own money, and that in 3 days she would have the account numbers that could freeze the entire Castellano fortune, and that until then the information was too dangerous to write down, so it lived only in Samantha's head, and she would be alone at the office late on Thursday, finishing the trace. It was a lie built entirely out of the shape of Samantha herself. The information lives in one person's head. She'll be alone. She's the key. Everything the enemy already believed about her offered up like bait, and then they waited. Thursday came, 9 o'clock. Samantha sat alone at her desk on the 29th floor exactly as the trap required, exactly as a bait is supposed to sit. And Alexander was 3 floors down in a dark room with a team and every camera in the building watching. And the whole thing rested on the terrible question of whether a man Alexander had loved for 15 years would come up in the elevator to kill the woman he loved. 9:40. The elevator opened, and it was not Marcus. It was Salvatore Castellano himself. Samantha's blood turned to ice because this was not the plan. This was not in any version of what they had prepared for. The head of the entire Castellano organization did not do his own killing. He was a man who moved empty containers across the country to send a message. He was patient and careful, and he never, ever put himself in a room. And yet here he was, an old man with silver hair and kind eyes and a tailored coat, stepping onto the 29th floor alone, walking towards Samantha's desk with his hands open and empty at his sides. "Please don't be frightened," Salvatore Castellano said in a voice like a grandfather's. "I'm not here to hurt you. If I wanted you hurt, Miss Miller, you'd have been hurt already. I'm here because I have wanted to meet you for 2 weeks, and I finally understood that the only way to meet you was to walk in the front door myself, because you catch everything else." He stopped a respectful distance away. "You are the most interesting person I have encountered in 40 years in this business. I had to see you with my own eyes." 3 floors down, Alexander was already moving, already in the elevator, and Samantha knew it, and she also knew she had 90 seconds alone with the most dangerous man in the city, and that 90 seconds was enough time to learn everything if she was smart, and she had always been smart. "You came yourself," Samantha said, keeping her voice steady, keeping him talking, buying the seconds. "That means the trap worked, but not the way we thought. We baited Marcus, and you came instead, which tells me something." "Does it?" Castellano's eyes glittered with interest. "Tell me what it tells you. I'm genuinely curious. I've read 3 reports about your mind, and I want to see it work." And Samantha Miller understood in a flash of cold clarity exactly what it told her, and it was the twist that turned the whole war over. "It tells me Marcus isn't your man," she said slowly. "If Marcus were your source, you'd have sent Marcus. Quiet, clean, no risk to you. But you came yourself in person, exposed into Blackwell's own building, which is the single most dangerous thing a man in your position could ever do." She stood up from her desk and she looked the old man in the eye. "You only do that for one reason. You came yourself because you couldn't trust anyone else to come. Because the piece of information we planted, the location of your money, was so dangerous to you that you couldn't risk even your own source knowing we were close to it. Which means," her breath caught as it came together, "which means Marcus is your source. He's real. But he's so valuable, so deep, so protected, that you would rather walk into this building yourself and die than risk exposing him by sending him to do this. You came to protect Marcus. You came because Marcus is worth more to you than your own life." Salvatore Castellano stared at her, and then slowly the old man began to smile, and it was not a grandfather's smile at all. 40 years, he said softly. 40 years in this business, and I have never once been read like that. Not by police, not by rivals, not by the FBI. He shook his head with something like wonder. "Alexander Blackwell has been fighting me with guns and money for 6 years and never came close. And you, in 2 weeks, from a secretary's desk." He took a step closer and his voice dropped, and the kindness in it was the most frightening thing Samantha had ever heard. "I did not come here to meet you, Miss Miller. That was a lie, and you caught it, which only proves my point. I came here to make you an offer, because a mind like yours wasted defending a man who kept you invisible for 3 years is the greatest tragedy I have ever seen. Come work for me. I will show you everything. I will never once ask you to be small, and I will pay you more in a year than Alexander Blackwell will make you in a lifetime of standing beside him, which, forgive an old man, is just a prettier word for behind him." 9:42. The elevator was rising. Alexander was 30 seconds away, and Samantha Miller stood on the 29th floor of the building where she had spent 3 years disappearing and faced the first person in her entire life who had looked at her and offered her the whole world and understood that this, not the pier, not the gun, not the black water, was the real test of who she had become. "You're offering me everything I've never had," she said quietly. "You saw it right away. That's why you're good. You looked at me for 2 weeks of reports and you found the exact wound. Nobody ever saw me. Nobody ever thought I mattered. And here you are, the most powerful man in the city, telling me I'm the most interesting person you've met in 40 years. She felt tears sting her eyes and she let them because they were true. You have no idea how much of my life I would have given for one person to say that to me. One person. Then say yes, Castellano said gently. Let someone finally see you. But someone already did, Samantha said, and the tears spilled over, and her voice did not shake. 3 nights ago, a man who has never begged for anything in his life got down on his knees inside himself and begged to kill her to spare me. Not because I'm useful, not because I'm interesting. He didn't know yet how useful I'd be. He begged because he couldn't stand a world without me in it. She wiped her face and stood taller. You're offering to see me, Mr. Castellano, but you only see what I can do. Alexander sees what I am, and I spent 27 years not being able to tell the difference between those two things. And I can tell now, and that's the only thing that's changed about me, and it's everything. She looked him dead in the eye. The answer is no. It was always going to be no. And I think somewhere in your 40 years you already knew that, and you came anyway because a man who has everything still can't stand to be told no by the one person who sees him clearly. That's your wound, Mr. Castellano. I read 3 reports about your mind, too. The elevator doors opened, and Alexander Blackwell stepped out onto the 29th floor and saw Salvatore Castellano standing 10 feet from Samantha, and everything in him went to war at once. And Samantha lifted one hand toward him, palm out steady. Stop, wait, trust me. And against every instinct he had, the most dangerous man in New York stopped. Salvatore, Alexander said, his voice shaking with a rage 15 years deep. Alexander. The old man did not even turn around. He kept his eyes on Samantha. You don't deserve her. You know that, don't you? You kept the most extraordinary mind in this city filing paperwork for 3 years because you were too much of a coward to see what was right in front of you. I saw it in 2 weeks from photographs. You had her for 3 years and you were afraid of her. He finally turned and his kind old face was full of something almost like grief. I lost tonight. I know I lost. She just told me no in a way that means she will never say yes, and a mind like that cannot be forced, only offered to, and she has chosen you. He shook his head. God help you, Alexander. You have no idea what you have. But she does. She just told me the whole thing standing right here. She knows exactly what she is now. And a woman like that who finally knows what she is. He almost smiled. You will never control her. And it is the only reason you might survive me. 9:44. And then Salvatore Castellano did the thing that no one in the room expected. The thing that turned the entire war over one final time. He reached into his coat slowly with Alexander's men flooding onto the floor, now and a dozen weapons rising toward him, and he pulled out a single phone and he set it on Samantha's desk. Marcus, he said, and you want him. He's mine, he's been mine for 6 years, and he is the best I have ever placed. On that phone is every message he ever sent me, every betrayal, every operation he sold. Proof, Miss Miller, the kind that stands up anywhere. He stepped back from the desk, hands open again. I'm giving him to you. The floor went silent. Why? Samantha breathed. Why would you burn your own source? 6 years, your best man. And Salvatore Castellano looked at her with those terrible kind eyes and gave her the answer. And it was the coldest thing she had ever heard. Because you said no, he said simply, you are worth more to me destroyed than Marcus is worth to me kept. If I cannot have the most dangerous mind in this city, then I will at least make certain that when you turn it loose on this organization, you turn it loose completely with everything holding nothing back. I am handing you Marcus so that you will owe your victory to me, so that every time you save Alexander Blackwell with what's on that phone, you will remember that Salvatore Castellano gave it to you because he saw you when no one else did. He began to walk toward the elevator, unhurried past the guns, at an old man who had already decided he would not be shot tonight and was correct. I am not finished with you, Miss Miller. I have simply changed my ambition. I no longer want to recruit you. He stopped in the elevator and the doors began to close, and his last words came through the narrowing gap. I want to be the one who finally makes you use everything you are, even if I have to become your enemy to do it, especially then. The doors closed. He was gone, and Samantha Miller stood on the 29th floor holding a phone that would end Marcus and half the Castellano organization. and understood that she had just won, and that winning this way meant she was now bound to Salvatore Castellano in a way that no gun or wall could ever break, because he had made her victory his gift, and a gift like that is a chain. He gave you Marcus, Alexander said, crossing to her, gripping her arms, checking her over the way he always would now. He gave you Marcus to trap you, to make you his, that old snake. I know, Samantha said, and she was shaking now, all of it hitting her at once, the offer and the refusal and the terrible gift. I know exactly what he did. He turned my own victory into a leash. She looked up at Alexander. And the worst part is, he's right about one thing. I have to use it. Marcus is real. He's on this phone. He's been selling you for 6 years, and I cannot let him keep doing it just because taking him means Castellano wins something too. She pressed the phone into Alexander's hand. It's all here. Everything Marcus did. The manifest, the meetings, the door he opened for Ethan. It's real and it's proof, and I was right, and I have never once in my life been sorry to be right until tonight. Alexander looked down at the phone. At 15 years of a man he had called a brother reduced to a screen full of betrayal. He told you he carried me out of Newark, Alexander said hollowly. It was Victor. Marcus put himself into the one memory I would never question. He closed his hand around the phone. I trusted no one for 15 years to keep from being betrayed. And I was betrayed anyway by the one person the trusting no one was supposed to protect. What was it all for Samantha? All that wall, all that fear? He got through it anyway. And Samantha Miller took his face in her hands the way he had taken hers on the pier, and she gave him the truth that had taken her whole life to learn. The wall never protected you, she said gently. It just made you lonely enough that a man like Marcus could live inside it because there was no one else in there to notice him. You didn't get betrayed despite the wall, Alexander. You got betrayed because of it. She held his eyes. The thing that finally caught Marcus wasn't fear. It wasn't the wall. It was trust. You trusted me enough to show me the hidden room, and I found him. Trust caught him. The exact thing you spent 15 years believing would destroy you is the only thing that saved you. She pressed her forehead to his. Salvatore Castellano trusts no one. That's why he had to come himself tonight. That's why he'll always be alone. And you were about to become him. You were one betrayal away from becoming exactly the man trying to kill you. She pulled back and looked at him. Don't. Please don't. Beat him by being the thing he can't be. Beat him by trusting the people who've earned it. Starting with the ones still standing in this building who never once sold you to anyone. Victor and me. 9:51. Alexander Blackwell looked at the phone in his hand and at the woman in front of him, and Samantha watched 15 years of a man's philosophy die and something new struggle to be born in its place. And it was the hardest thing she had ever watched anyone do. Harder than the pier, harder than the water, because it is easier to face a gun than to unlearn the thing that kept you alive. Marcus is downstairs, Alexander said finally. He's been downstairs this whole time, watching the cameras, watching you sit here as bait. His jaw tightened. He watched Salvatore Castellano walk in and offer you the world, and he did nothing because he couldn't break cover because his master told him to protect his position at any cost. He looked at the phone. He thinks the trap failed. He thinks I still don't know. Then you have a choice to make, Samantha said quietly, and it's yours, not mine. You can go down there with guns and 15 years of rage and end it the way the old Alexander would. Or, she paused, you can do the thing that actually destroys a man like Marcus. You can walk down there and sit across from him and let him watch you know. Let him understand that trust caught him, that the woman he dismissed as bait read his entire life, that everything he built inside your head for 15 years fell apart in 2 weeks because you finally let one person in. Her voice was steady. That's what breaks a spy, Alexander. Not a bullet. A bullet is mercy. What breaks them is watching the thing they thought was their greatest weakness in you turn out to be the thing that beat them. Alexander Blackwell looked at Samantha Miller for a long moment, and then for the first time since she had known him, the coldness that came over his face was not the old ice, the fear pretending to be strength. It was something new. It was calm. It was certain. It was a man who had finally stopped being afraid of the thing that had run his whole life. Come with me, he said, and he held out his hand. Not behind me, next to me. I want him to see us walk in together. I want the last thing Marcus understands before this ends to be that he lost to the two things he never believed in. He almost smiled, and it was terrible and free. Trust. And the woman nobody looked at. Samantha Miller took his hand. And together, side by side, neither one behind the other, they walked toward the elevator to go and end the man who had lived inside Alexander's walls for 15 years, carrying between them a phone full of the truth and a new understanding that the war was not over, that Salvatore Castellano was still out there and had just made himself the most dangerous kind of enemy, the kind who wants you to win so that he can watch what you become. But that was tomorrow's war. Tonight, there was a brother to bury, and for the first time in 15 years, Alexander Blackwell was not going to do it alone, and was not going to do it afraid, and was going to do it from beginning to end, standing next to the one person who had taught him that the strongest thing a powerful man can ever do is let himself be truly seen. The elevator doors opened. They stepped in together. And as the doors closed and the car began to descend toward the man who had betrayed everything, Samantha Miller looked at her own reflection in the polished steel, a woman in a blazer that no longer hid anything, standing next to the most powerful man in New York as his equal, and she did not recognize the person looking back. And then she did, and understood that she had been that person all along. Folded up small, waiting 27 years for one single moment when someone would finally ask her to stand up. She was standing up now, and she was never going to fold up again. The elevator doors opened on the third floor, and Marcus was sitting exactly where they had left him in front of the wall of camera feeds. And he turned when he heard them, and Samantha watched the precise moment his 15-year performance ended. It ended when he saw their hands. Because Marcus was the best liar Salvatore Castellano had ever placed, and the best liars are the best readers, and Marcus took one look at Alexander Blackwell walking in calm and certain, with the invisible secretary at his side, hand in hand, and he knew. He knew before a single word was spoken. He knew that the trap had not failed, that it had never been about Castellano at all, that the whole thing had been built to make him believe he was safe, while a woman he had dismissed as bait read his entire life. Alexander, Marcus said, and his voice was still steady, still loyal, still perfect. Castellano came himself. I couldn't move on him without blowing the whole floor. I made the call to hold. Did we get him? Did we stop? Alexander said quietly. And Marcus stopped because the one word carried 15 years in it, and even the best liar in the world cannot talk his way out of that single syllable when it comes from a brother. 10:04 in the evening. Samantha set the phone Salvatore Castellano had given her down on the desk in front of Marcus, face up, and she did not say anything because she did not have to. Marcus looked at his own phone, at the messages glowing on the screen, at 6 years of his own betrayal handed over by the man he had betrayed everyone for, and something in his face came apart very slowly, the way a building comes down from the inside first. He gave you the phone, Marcus said. It was not a question. His voice had gone hollow. Salvatore gave you the phone, my phone, the messages. He laughed once, and there was no humor in it at all. Of course he did. Of course. The moment I stopped being useful, I stopped being protected. 6 years. He looked up at Samantha, and his eyes were wet and furious and lost. Do you understand what he did? He didn't just burn me. He burned me to make you his. He spent his best asset, 6 years of work, to put a hook in you. That's what you're worth to him. More than me. More than everything I gave him. I know, Samantha said quietly. You don't know anything, Marcus snarled. And for the first time, the loyal mask fell all the way off, and underneath was 15 years of a man who had lived inside another man's trust like a parasite. You think you won. You think you're clever. You read some files and caught some timestamps. But you don't understand what you've become. Castellano doesn't want to kill Alexander anymore. He told you himself, didn't he? He wants you. He'll spend the rest of his life throwing everything at you just to watch you use everything you are. You're not free of him. You just became his whole reason to keep breathing. Marcus looked at Alexander then, and his voice cracked all the way through. I gave you 15 years. I put myself in your Newark story. I held your hand while you screamed. And you're going to destroy me over a woman you kept filing paperwork for 3 years because you were too much of a coward to look at her. The room went silent. And Alexander Blackwell, who 3 weeks ago would have answered that with a gun, pulled a chair across the floor and sat down across from the man who had betrayed him, calm and close, so that they were eye to eye. And he did the hardest thing Samantha had ever watched him do. He did not rage. He did not break. He simply told the truth. You never held my hand in Newark, Alexander said quietly. Victor Hale did. I found out 3 weeks ago on a pier from Victor himself when he thought he was dying and had no reason left to lie. He watched the words land, watched them take something out of Marcus that would never come back. You built yourself into my memory of the worst night of my life because you understood something about me that I didn't understand about myself. You understood that I would never question the man who saved me. So you became him. You stole the one thing I had that was real, and you made it about you. Alexander's voice did not rise, and that was what made it terrible. You're right that I was a coward about her. You're right that I kept her invisible because I was afraid. But here's the thing, you never counted on Marcus. The day I stopped being a coward is the day you lost. Because the moment I trusted one person completely, she found you. 15 years you survived inside my fear. You lasted 3 weeks against my trust. Marcus stared at him. That's the whole secret you never understood. Alexander went on, and now he stood slowly. You thought my walls kept me safe, so you lived inside them. But the walls were never protecting me from enemies. They were just keeping me alone enough that a snake could live in the dark and never be seen. The day I let the light in, the day I trusted her, there was nowhere left for you to hide. He looked down at the man who had been his brother. You didn't lose to a bullet, Marcus. You lost to the one thing you spent 15 years betting I'd never do. You lost to me finally letting someone see me. 10:11. Marcus opened his mouth and closed it, and there was nothing left to say because the truth had already been said, and it had broken him more completely than any threat ever could. He sat in the chair in front of the cameras he had used to sell his brother for 6 years, and he understood that he was not going to die tonight, that Alexander was not going to give him even that. Instead, he was going to live a very long time in a very small room, knowing that everything he had built had come apart, not because he was caught, but because the man he betrayed had finally learned to love. Take him, Alexander said to the men at the door. He goes to the same place as Voss and Marcus. He waited until the man looked up. Salvatore Castellano threw you away the moment I mattered less to him than she did. Sit with that. That's your sentence. Not the room, the knowing. They took him. And Alexander Blackwell stood in the room where his oldest betrayal had finally ended. And for a long moment he did not move, and Samantha crossed to him and took his hand and said nothing, because some griefs do not want words. They only want a hand, and she had learned that a long time ago, being the person nobody ever offered a hand to. 15 years, Alexander finally said. I know. He was the last one from before. When he's gone, there's no one left who knew me when I was nobody. He looked at her. You're the only person who knows all of me now. The hidden room, the history, everything. There's no one else. Then I'll be careful with it, Samantha said, the way someone should have been careful with you a long time ago. And Alexander Blackwell looked at the woman who had walked into his hidden life and found the snake in it and pulled him out of the dark he had lived in for 15 years. And he understood that the thing he had been most afraid of his entire life, being truly known, was the only thing that had ever actually saved him. The war with Salvatore Castellano did not end that night. It ended slowly over the months that followed, and it ended the way Samantha had promised Alexander it would not. With fear, but with the thing Castellano could never do, which was trust. She used the phone. Of course she used it. Marcus's 6 years of betrayal laid out message by message became the thread she pulled, and pulling it unraveled everything. Every operation Castellano had run through his source, every account, every contact, every judge and councilman and port official. The old man had bought over 40 years, all of it connected back through the messages Marcus had sent. And Samantha followed every thread to its end, because following threads to their end was the thing she had always been better at than anyone. But she did not do it alone, and that was the difference, and that was the whole point. She built a team. She took Victor Hale, who owed her his daughter's life, and gave her in return a loyalty that 15 years of Marcus's lies had never given Alexander. She took Dennis Rourke, who came back from being tied to a chair in his own basement with a hatred of the Castellanos that made him the most careful head of security in the city. She took the people in the building that everyone else had walked past, the analysts and the clerks and the quiet ones, who saw everything and were never asked, because Samantha Miller knew exactly what it was to be one of them, and she asked. She was the first person in the history of Blackwell Global Logistics who asked the invisible people what they saw. And they saw everything. Together they saw everything. 6 weeks after Red Hook, they froze the first Castellano account. 10 weeks in, they turned a Castellano lieutenant who had watched Salvatore throw away Marcus and understood correctly that loyalty in that organization was worth nothing. 4 months in, Councilman Vasquez, the man who had recommended Ethan Carter, was arrested on evidence that appeared in a federal prosecutor's inbox from a source that could never be traced, because Samantha had learned a great deal about being untraceable from studying the enemy who had once sent her an empty box. And through all of it, Salvatore Castellano watched. He never moved against Samantha directly again. He did something stranger and more unsettling. He watched her dismantle his empire piece by piece over months, and every few weeks a small gift would arrive at her desk. Never a threat, a gift, a file she needed appearing at exactly the right moment, a name she had been hunting delivered anonymously. A warning once that saved Victor Hale's life when a lieutenant Samantha had not yet identified came for him. Salvatore Castellano was helping her destroy his own organization, one careful gift at a time. And Samantha understood exactly why, because he had told her why on the 29th floor. He wanted to watch her use everything she was, even if it cost him everything, especially then. "He's insane," Alexander said one night, staring at the latest gift, a ledger that would let them freeze the last of the Castellano offshore accounts. "He's helping you end him." "Why? Why would a man do that?" "Because I'm the first person in 40 years who ever really saw him," Samantha said quietly. "And he's the first person in 27 years who ever really saw me. And neither one of us can stand that the only person who truly sees us is on the other side." She set the ledger down. "He'd rather be destroyed by me than ignored by everyone else. I understand it, Alexander. God help me, I understand it completely. It's the loneliest thing in the world to be seen by exactly one person and have that person be your enemy." She looked up. "That's why I'm going to beat him. Not the money, not the accounts. That's not how it ends. It ends when I take away the one thing he can't live without." "Which is?" "Me," Samantha said. "The day I stop paying attention to him. The day I win so completely that he stops being my enemy and becomes just an old man in a room, that's the day it's over for him. He can survive being destroyed. He cannot survive being finished with." She stood. "So that's how I'm going to end the most dangerous man in the city. Not with a gun. I'm going to solve him so completely that there's nothing left to watch, and then I'm going to walk away and leave him alone with the one thing he was always most afraid of." And that is exactly how it ended. 8 months after an empty container arrived at Samantha Miller's desk, the Castellano organization was gone. Not defeated in a war, not ended in blood on a pier, but dismantled thread by thread and account by account, name by name, by a team of people that the old world had decided were invisible, led by a woman that same world had decided did not matter. The lieutenants were in custody or turned. The money was frozen or seized or quietly returned to the people it had been stolen from. The judges and officials were exposed. And Salvatore Castellano, who had ruled the shadows of the city for 40 years, sat in a small house under a federal agreement that Samantha had engineered so completely that no one, not even Alexander, fully understood how she had done it. She went to see him once at the end. She did not tell Alexander she was going. She went alone the way she did the important things, and she sat across from the old man in his small, quiet house, and Salvatore Castellano looked at her with those terrible, kind eyes and smiled the smile that had frightened her once and did not frighten her anymore. "You came," he said. "I wondered if you would, I hoped." "I came to tell you it's over," Samantha said. "All of it. The last account closed this morning. There's nothing left to fight over, nothing left to protect, nothing left to send me. It's finished." "I know." Salvatore folded his hands. "You did it exactly the way I hoped you would. Completely. Beautifully. You used everything you are. Do you have any idea how rare that is, Miss Miller? To watch a person become the fullest version of themselves. I have waited 40 years to see it, and I got to see it aimed directly at me." He shook his head slowly. "It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Being destroyed by you. I would not trade it for another 40 years of winning." And Samantha Miller, who had learned to read every human being she ever met, because reading them was the only power the invisible are given, looked at the old man and gave him the last truth, the one that ended everything. "That's the saddest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said gently. "And I've heard a lot of sad things. You spent 40 years so alone that being destroyed by someone who saw you clearly was better than winning. You didn't lose because I was smarter, Mr. Castellano. I wasn't. You lose the same way you were always going to lose, because you never let anyone in. And so the only person who ever really knew you was your enemy, and an enemy is not a substitute for a life. She stood. I'm not going to come back. This is the last time you will ever see me, and I'm not doing that to punish you. I'm doing it because I finally understand the difference between us, and it's the only thing that was ever different, and it's everything. She looked down at him. You wanted to be seen. So you made an enemy who could see you. I wanted to be seen too. But I let someone love me instead. And that's why you're sitting alone in this room. And I'm going home to people who know all of me and stayed anyway. She turned toward the door. Goodbye, Mr. Castellano. You were the smartest man I ever met, and the loneliest, and in the end, those were the same thing. She walked out. She did not look back. And Salvatore Castellano sat alone in his small, quiet house with the one thing he had spent his whole life avoiding, which was himself and no one to watch him be it. And that was the ending Samantha Miller had engineered from the very beginning, because she had understood from the first empty box that you do not defeat a man like that by taking his empire. You defeat him by taking his audience. 1 year later, Samantha Miller stood in the corner office on the top floor of Blackwell Global Logistics, the office that used to belong to Daniel Voss, the CFO, who had pointed a gun at her in the red emergency light, and she watched the city she had once walked through with her head down, folding herself smaller with every step. She was the executive director now. She had not asked for the title. Alexander had offered it, and she had said yes, and the difference between the woman who would have whispered a grateful yes a year ago and the woman who said it now plainly as something she had earned was the whole story of everything that had happened. She did not wear the loose gray blazers anymore. She wore clothes that fit the body the world had spent 27 years telling her to hide, and she wore them because it was her body, and she was done apologizing for the space it took up. And when she walked through the glass towers of Manhattan, now people looked at her and she looked back, and she did not fold up because the woman who had learned to disappear had finally permanently decided to be seen. You're doing the thing again, Alexander said from the doorway. What thing? Looking out the window like you're surprised to be standing this high. He crossed the office and stood next to her, next to Never Behind. They had learned that on a pier and never forgotten it. You've been the executive director for 6 months, and you still look out that window like someone's going to come take it back. Old habit, Samantha said. 27 years of being told where I belonged. It doesn't leave all at once. She leaned into him. But it's leaving, a little more every day. Grace Chen, who ran the front desk a year ago, and now ran the entire operations division, because Samantha had seen what everyone else had walked past, appeared in the doorway. The Rotterdam expansion is signed. Board approved it unanimously, and Samantha. Grace smiled. They asked for you, by name, all of them, the same board that used to walk past your desk without seeing you. They wanted to know if you'd approve the final terms before they proceed. Samantha felt something move in her chest, something that took a moment to name because she had felt it so rarely in her life. It was not triumph. It was quieter than that and deeper. It was the feeling of a room finally rearranging itself around the truth of who she had always been. Tell them yes, she said. And Grace, thank you for asking me to your desk that morning, a year ago before any of this. For being kind to the invisible woman when there was nothing in it for you. She looked at her friend. I remember who was kind to me before I mattered. I'll always remember. Grace left, and it was just the two of them again. Samantha Miller and Alexander Blackwell standing at the top of the empire they had saved together, and the man who had once been the coldest, most feared person in New York City looked at the woman beside him with an expression that had not one trace of ice left in it anywhere. I have to tell you something, Alexander said, and I've been trying to find the right way to say it for a year, and there isn't one. So I'm just going to say it plainly the way you taught me to say things. He turned to face her. A year ago, I told a killer on a pier that I couldn't stand a world without you in it. I meant it as the most I could feel. I understand now that it was the least. It was just the first thing I understood about you. He took her hands. I don't want to protect you. I stopped wanting that a long time ago. I don't want to own your smile or control who you give it to. I spent one terrible day of my life saying don't smile at another man, and I have spent every day since learning what an insult that was to the bravest, most extraordinary person I have ever known. He held her eyes. Smile at whoever you want. Smile at the whole world. I'll be the man standing next to you when you do grateful for every single one, because a smile you choose to give is worth more than all the fear and money and control I spent 15 years collecting. I know that now. You taught me that. Samantha's eyes filled. You remember what I said? She whispered. The first thing I ever really said back to you. I said I don't need someone to own my life. I need someone who believes in me. I remember every word you've ever said to me. You believe in me now. No, Alexander said quietly. Believing in you was a year ago. That was just the beginning, too. He shook his head. I don't believe in you anymore, Samantha. I've watched you dismantle the most dangerous organization in the city with a team of people everyone else threw away. I've watched you defeat a man 40 years my superior by understanding him better than he understood himself. I've watched you turn every single thing the world called a weakness in you into the exact thing that won. I'm past believing in you. He lifted her hands. I know what you are now, and what you are is the strongest person I have ever met, and the fact that you spent 27 years being told you were nothing is the greatest crime I've ever encountered, and I get to spend the rest of my life being the person who was smart enough finally to see it. And Samantha Miller, the secretary? Nobody looked at the curvy woman in the loose gray blazer who had learned to fold herself small enough to disappear, stood at the top of the city that had once refused to see her and understood at last that the arithmetic of her entire life had been wrong from the very first calculation, that the number she had carried alone for 27 years had always quietly been leading to this, to a room this high, and a man who knew all of her, and a life she had built with her own overlooked, underestimated, extraordinary mind. She did not do the math anymore. She had thrown the math away. I have to tell you the truth about something, she said, and she was smiling now through the tears. The day Ethan Carter grabbed my wrist and told me to smile, or you'd be dead by Friday. The day this whole thing started, I was so scared I could barely breathe. But there was one second where a part of me was almost glad, because for the first time in my whole life something was happening to me. I was in the story instead of watching from the corner. She squeezed his hands. I spent 27 years watching everyone else's lives from the corner of the room. And then one terrible day I got dragged into the middle of one, and I found out I was never meant to be in the corner. I was meant to be right here, in the center, standing up. You were, Alexander said. You always were. Everyone was just too small to see it. Samantha looked out at the city one more time, the whole blazing sprawl of it, the towers and the water, and the 8 million people, and somewhere out there was a small, quiet house with a lonely old man in it who had understood her and lost her, and somewhere out there was a little girl named Emma who would grow up telling the story of the woman who walked out of the dark, and somewhere out there was every recruiter and every boy in high school and every person who had ever decided she did not matter. And Samantha Miller looked at all of it without folding up, without getting smaller, without doing the math, and she felt the last of the old fear leave her body for good. You know what the strangest part is, she said. For 27 years, I thought my whole problem was that nobody could see me, that if I could just make them look, everything would change. She turned to Alexander and her face was clear and certain and entirely her own. But that was never it. The world saw me fine. It looked right at me and decided what I was worth. The problem was never that they couldn't see me. She lifted her chin. The problem was that I believed them. And the day I stopped, the day I decided I got to be the one who says what I'm worth, that was the day everything changed. Not when the world started seeing me differently, when I did. Alexander Blackwell pulled her close and she led him, and they stood together at the top of the city, the most powerful man in New York, and the woman he had spent 3 years failing to see, and the rest of his life determined never to overlook again. And below them the empire ran on the strength of every invisible person Samantha had finally thought to ask. And out in the city the enemies were gone and the danger was ended and the war was over. Truly over won, not by fear or force, but by a woman who had learned to stop making herself small. And whenever Samantha smiled after that across a crowded room in a board meeting on a street corner in the city that had once refused to see her, She smiled freely at whoever she pleased, and Alexander never felt one flicker of the jealousy that had started all of this because he had finally learned the only thing that had ever mattered, the thing it had taken a gun and a peer and a betrayal and a year to understand. A person who chooses to stand beside you freely when she is strong enough to stand anywhere she wants and could walk away in an instant is worth more than every empire ever built on fear. Samantha Miller was never invisible. She was simply waiting, folded up in the corner of a world too small to hold her for the single moment when someone would finally ask her to stand up. And when that moment came, she stood, and she never sat back down, and she built a life so large and so bright and so entirely her own that the little girl she had once been hiding in loose gray blazers and doing the cruel arithmetic of her own worth would not have recognized the woman she became. But that woman had been there all along. She always was.